A bright flame breaks out of the hot pan, and rice grains and shrimps fly in the air. You can see a young cook near the pan. When preparing, he mentioned warm moments from his childhood, which are related to his decision to become a cook. Father switched the son from the game by an invitation to the table. Going, he was pleasantly impressed. A delicious paste for a special recipe was waiting for a little guy on the table. After tasting, Dad asked if he liked. In joy, his son replied that he was the most delicious yakjangim, which he once tasted. Departed from the memory, he continued to cook carefully. However, the employees of the restaurant did not like that in one kitchen a person was not working with them. According to hard work, the cook did not notice that a group of people was behind him. Suddenly, the boss turned to him. The guy was a surprise. The chef made it clear that China is a place where family ties are very important. In doing so, he lowered the young cook from heaven. The earth went from under his feet when the guy realized that he was not happy here. However, he did not lose the hope of staying at this place of work. The boss, by hugging his own, probably relatives, was adamant in his decision. After this situation, the chef went to his country on the oceanic liner. Standing by the handrail, he thought about his vocation to cook in a Chinese restaurant. Tears came from his eyes and rolled on his cheeks. The boy squeezed the handrails even stronger. The upset uttered his thoughts aloud, which was why he was careless. The liner workers heard some strange noise. Suddenly the guy fell overboard into the water. Without lost, he wanted to save himself, flowing to the sea surface. Underwater, the new moon noticed some suspicious movements. Returning, he noticed a huge whale. The marine resident stopped right in front of the guy. 30 seconds, he opened his mouth. The young man immediately realized that it was the end of his life. Swallowing his tiny prey, the whale turned, and as it did, swam. The guy in the middle of a beautiful lake, in which he shifted the full moon. He got up, there was no choice, and he realized that he was reincarnated. Now he was Ryu Chonvon. It was raining. What pleasant smell stood around. Having passed a couple of steps, an unknown man in a triangular dowel thought about where to stop, so as not to get wet. Suddenly behind him ran a stranger. Looking back, he noticed that more than 3 suspicious people were watching him. Without wasting time, the man squeezed his katana. Looking back, he saw the building. It was a recently opened tavern. Ryu Chonvon with a smile on his face, wiping the tables. After that, singing his favorite tune, he swept the floor. And then he rubbed to the shine. Having done all the things in the interior, he began to draw a sign for the exterior. The man who was monitored opened the door to a new institution. Ryu happily greeted him, but an unpleasant silence sounded in response. Without reading the menu, the removed man ordered what he wanted. Inspired by the first visitor, the young cook went to the kitchen. He scattered meat and dumplings, as if his life depended on it. Suddenly, the guest entered the kitchen and put his sword next to his future food. Ryu Chonvon was very scared. Terrible sounds came behind. The only visitor was not surprised, and the owner of the tavern was even more panicked. One of the bandits broke his heavy foot roof. Then he found himself indoors. Ryu was not upset. The rest of the robbers did not wait long and rushed. The visitor quickly got his katana. It was like a sign to start a fight. He was not a little frightened. One of the attackers did not have time to be ashamed, as he no longer had a quarter of his hand. This was the cause of fear for others armed. But the attackers did not lose the hope of defeating the man who became the first client of tavern. The chef, meanwhile, fell on the floor so that he was not injured. Lying, the owner of the room was quietly asked to stop. No one stopped his pleas. The fight was in full swing. Ryu could not come to mind all the time. Suddenly, the fighting moved to the kitchen, and then plates and products flew into the hall. The newly made taverna owner was still in anticipation of the end of this harmiter. He tersely looked at the sign that was in perfect condition before the fight, and did not believe that it was such the beginning of his new life. Looking at the defeat around him, he was very sorry for the money spent. Through the broken roof, the rain dropped into the room. All in the gardens, with a disheveled hairstyle, the chef hoped to never get into such situations again. Suddenly at the entrance, someone spoke. The cook was surprised. These were new visitors, a family of 4 people. Looking around, they began to think about whether to stay here at all. The owner did not get lost from the floor. 2 twins became scared of his appearance. Despite his depressed emotional state, Ryu still invited customers to come. Frightened even more, one of the twins attacked him, thinking that he was a demon. Thus, one of the walls of the room was broken. The appearance was creepy. Everything is contaminated with traces of blood, but a bearded man apologized for his younger child. There was nothing left for the young war. How to forgive the little one. Having examined the total devastation, he offered only 1 dish from the menu. After consulting with their eldest daughter, they decided to stop here. Before going to the kitchen, Ryu stared at the Chan. She had extremely beautiful blue eyes that were quite unusual for the area. He continued to look at her without shame. After a minute, his father took him out of trance, and the little twins wanted to protect their lady. Meanwhile, his father began to tell the story of a childhood of a blue-eyed girl. Ryu was awkward before her. He bowed and wanted to cheer her up. Choosing the words, the guy spoke with her. What was the lady embarrassed? Cook issued a compliment, and after he ran to the kitchen, Yang did not understand anything, thinking that the compliment was not about the eyes. In the kitchen, Ryu mentioned a fight. Looking around, he saw a defeat. The boy fell to the floor. He needed time to come to his senses. Sticking himself on his cheeks, he realized that he needed to take his hands. He put on a special bandage on his head. He tightened her tightly so that she did not inadvertently decide. Took the knife in the right hand, and with his left hand he grabbed a pan which fell to the floor during the morning fight. Just wanted to put it on the stove. But I realized that first you need to clean. From the high humidity of the room, the frog jumped. One of the twins gave tears in the eyes. She was very hungry, so she began to whine. Suddenly, the head of the family began to complain, until heard the most pleasant aroma of food from the kitchen. In front of their table appeared a Raya with large plates from which steam came. He was cautious to place hot dishes to the guests. Visitors were surprised. They were counting on another. The cook began to calm the guests. Name the name of this amazing paste according to a unique recipe. The atmosphere did not forget the morning fight. Looking at their dishes, the guests were shocked. The plates had a paste, half of boiled eggs, herbs, and meat in black sauce. It seemed to his father that everything had burned. The first dish was one of the twins. From this wonderful taste, her eyes glowed. The second girl lagged behind and began to eat too. Looking at how the girls eat this dish that was spoiled, the father tried to gather with thoughts. He looked at his plate again. The twins seemed to be wild. One of them suggested the presence of prohibited substances in the paste. From the herd, the cook tensed. The sweat drip appeared on his face. He didn't think someone would guess. The classic paste sauce recipe does not require many ingredients, but some add caramel extract to saturation of taste. Unfortunately, in those days, which reincarnated Ryu, caramel syrup has not yet been invented. 3 ingredients are not enough to achieve the appropriate taste. Therefore, the chef created his recipe by combining the seaweed and shiitake's mushrooms. Subsequently, having dried these 2 additives, it turned out what he tried to achieve. With caution, the man took a little paste on the sticks, and without losing vigilance, he tasted. From this taste, his eyes shone differently. This dish was the best he had ever eaten. The desire to leave the empty plate did not let the father stop for a minute. Despite the color of the sauce, everything was balanced. The man seemed to be in a trance from pleasure. The loud thunder scared the birds sitting on a collapsed roof. The twins continued to dinner. The blue-eyed beauty looked at her dad. He was careless, so he smeared the sauce in his face, neck, and kimono. Suddenly he noticed something. While everyone had empty plates, his blue-eyed daughter did not even try the dish. Ryu Chonvan rejoiced, until he noticed the presence of food in the ND. Asking what is the matter, he did not receive a clear answer. The father understood everything. Standing his dishes, he suggested that she taste. He provided his moral support. Ryu thought about the creation of handkerchiefs for a second. John removed her face accessory. The girl had not only unsurpassed blue eyes, but also crushed lips. The cook did not expect to see it. The father caught the boy by surprise, and he explained that it was an unknown disease that pursues Chon from childhood. The girl accepted to eat a delicious dish, while the father told about their path to the doctor. Suddenly, Ryu turned into a loud sound. It was a John. She lost consciousness. The girl's father did not joke. He began to insult a young cook, and the twins began to blame him of murder. Ryu Chonvan did not know what to say to him, because he did not put any extra supplements in the dish for the girl. John's skin began to get a cyanotic color, and red allergic spots of different sizes were visible on the neck and cheeks. The father did not stop calling the girl, hoping that she would open her eyes. When he realized that in simple words to solve this problem would not work, he ordered everyone to get away, and he began to perform actions that looked like magic. As a result, the roof of the tavern was damaged again. It was upset by Ryu again. The man continued to save his daughter. Suddenly, the guy became more attentive. Rating the girl, he noticed swelling, rash, cold, sticky sweat, shortness of breath of different nature. He remembered his father's words about a childhood illness of a blue-eyed girl. The girl has hemoptysis, which is a very dangerous symptom. The father began to panic because after tracing her energy, he realized that she could die. Ryu gained courage and called a man, but the latter did not want to let the guy and his daughter. The cook, without listening to the image, began to approach closer, at the same time asking for such a vital indicator as a pulse. The father was very surprised to hear the question. Meanwhile, Ryu came closer, showing that he can help save the girl. The angry man drove the guy away, but he accepted to check the pulse. The atmosphere around has become anxious. The devastation became even larger than the morning fight. The twins tried to resist on their feet. Having checked the pulse, the man came to the conclusion that Ryu may be associated with medicine. The guy, sweaty from the tension, wanted to answer, but his father began to beg him. He tearfully asked for Ryu to save the blue-eyed John. After today's adventures, the tavern has the appearance of an abandoned shed. The Ryu put a deep vessel with cool water and a clean towel. Mr. and twins have never seen this because they have always been used to use energy. Ryu Chonvan, having moistened the towel in the water, spoke each of his resuscitation. Having examined the oral cavity, he noticed the swelling of the tongue, which did not allow the girl to breathe. Having analyzed the actions of the NNO in the last 10 minutes, Ryu realized that it was anaphylactic shock. At this point, he mentioned that in his past life he had already had a similar case, but it all ended in death. Immediately the cook thought that it caused an allergic reaction. According to the circumstances, his attention was attracted by the twins who stood above the inverted plate of noodles. Ryu immediately remembered that Jjangim was sprinkled with nuts. He squeezed his teeth with malice. Looking at a girl who lost consciousness through him, the young cook punished herself. The guy asked a pretty strange question how to his father, an exhausted daughter. The tension between Ryu and the man began to grow. Remembering the first aid algorithm, the chef began to act. The first thing he did is the mouth-to-mouth artificial respiration. The twins were angry. It was wild for them. The father has fallen over and lost the gift of language. The girls began to attack and bite Ryu, but it was important for him only one thing: to save the John. The second step of the guy was an indirect heart massage, from which the twins were even more confused. Not attention, Ryu Chonvan continued the resuscitation measures. He felt guilty. The father rushed to the boy, corrected his kimono. The cook frightened such sharp actions behind him. The facial expressions of the man made it clear that he was angry. Ryu was flooded with fatigue. The father was angry. No one has the right to look at his daughter from top to bottom. Under the influence of negative emotions, the head of the family began to threaten the boy. Ryu Chonvan could not breathe, because the aura of his father Jong was unbearable. But the young chef sought to save the girl, so he continued to carry out an indirect heart massage. The anger of his father had no limits. His eyes were completely filled with white glow, and his hair and clothing flew in the air, as if there was no gravity. Twins from the side observed the development of events. The man repeated his threat more angrily. Ryu began to answer him. He made it clear that his daughter could die. The anger of his father began to subside. The new moon, flowing with a lot of sweat, continued to carefully intensive care. Dad was amazed at the actions of a young man who was at risk of his life. Saved a girl unknown to him. Chon gave signs of life. She opened her eyes, but was still very weakened. My father lifted her a little. Ryu spent all his forces on rescue. He fell to the floor, but no one paid attention to it. The exhausted cook tried to adjust the breath. He looked at the full moon through the punched roof of his tavern, and analyzed today. Warm, fresh air flooded the room through the open window. Ryu Chongvan was visible horrors in a dream, from which he dynamically dropped the blanket and got in the cold sweat. The young man did not remember how he spent his room. Lifting his gaze, he saw that he was faced with an angry father of a blue-eyed girl. From fright, Ryu shouted and moved closer to the wall. Recalling yesterday, he tried to understand the cause of the man's anger, but his father began a dialogue without any aggressive emotions. He called his name. The taverna owner was surprised and stopped. He realized that a powerful man was sitting in front of him. The father of a blue-eyed girl is a Chon from the mighty ancient clan Chagal. Hearing this, Ryu spoke in the language associated with this clan. He continued to say something and surprised the man. After that, the young cook spoke the commandments from a special book. Thus, even more surprised by Chon, Ryu Chonvan, with a smile on his face, mentioned a girl whom he admired the most. And not only her, but others had no important chronicles of those times. In his past life, he collecting books, figures, and games that were created from the image of the Chagal clan. Chagal Liang is a girl with pink long hair, thematic clothing, and a large headdress. The facial expressions on the face of Ryu Chonvan changed with the seriousness of the boldness of the image of a beloved girl of a beloved clan. Without thinking, Chon grabbed the guy by his shoulders, thus scaring him. But with a smile, he published a rather unusual offer. Ryu at first seemed to be heard, and then he found benefit. Remembering yesterday's fight, the chef realized that no one would dare to stuck with his new status. Getting on your feet and making a traditional greeting gesture. Ryu Chonvan called his name. Finding a similarity in the names of the boy and his daughter, Chon joyfully scratched his beard. After that, without explaining anything, he hugged a new member of his clan, and forgot all misunderstandings. Tears came from the guy's warmth. While the twin remedied the roof of the recently opened tavern, Chon and Ryu talked about banal things. Dawn was as good as possible. The sun gave its warmth, and the sky was shimmering a good gradient. Going into the dining room, Ryu was surprised. There was no trace left of the defeat, traces of blood, broken dishes, and residues of food. Suddenly the boy heard voices from the kitchen. With caution, he went to the kitchen. Twins harmoniously and carelessly prepared, seemingly poison. From the appearance of this food, Ryu twisted, and then it was quite faded and wanted to go. Going to the exit, one of the twins noticed him. The girls explained that they were preparing for Mrs. Zhang. Ryu stayed in the kitchen, and he mentioned yesterday's incident in which he is only to blame. The cook removed the twins from the pan and took away a sharp knife. He tightened a tight red bandage so that his hair did not interfere, picked up all the necessary products, but he promised that it would be the best dish for patients. The twins watched his actions with surprise. They did not lose the opportunity to pick up a chef for his yesterday's actions. Yang was pleasantly surprised by the culinary works of Ryu. Before her stood dishes, which was filled with a snack of rice and vegetables, and not spicy sauce and fried mushrooms. The twins made sure that the ladies tasted everything. Yang worried about the larynx swelling, which could prevent her from saturating her own body. But the girls explained that there was no threat. Ryu skillfully cut the vegetables into thin slices, and then he was spectacularly throwing them up, and just skillfully cut into the air in large cubes, and then the cubes are smaller. On a hot pan, a young cook began to fry one of the most important ingredients, and the twins were taken to play with fire. He began to pour the saturated broth to the hot mixture skillfully and carefully, so as not to spray everything around. The twin at this time looked at the preparation, holding their breath. Ryu wiped drops with a sweaty side of the palm, as the real chef does. Having recruited a full spoonful of excellent, this time not allergic, dishes, Yang tasted with pleasure. Swallowing the food lump, she kept her breath, and her cheeks were filled with a blush. The blue-eyed beauty mentally went into a trance just like her father, having tasted Jiaxing'an yesterday. A few days later, a small family was going to leave the tavern and go on the road in search of a doctor for NNO. Chon and Chonvan crossed their hands in a friendly handshake. The father once again thanked the taverna owner for the delicious food, the opportunity to stay in the warmth and salvation of his daughter. Before leaving, the John was easy to come to Ryu, and in gratitude she stretched out a token that can be sought for any help. Ryu Chongvan did not want to believe that he was given such a valuable thing. He wanted to pay off something grand for such a gift. But Chan is a young cook. Ryu was delighted. Finally, Han, having pounded on his right shoulder, pointed to a ceremony. The boy was alarmed, because they have not talked about such events in recent days. Suddenly, he remembered the proposal to become part of the family, so he thought of the oath ceremony. Having happy agreeing with the words of the father of a blue-eyed girl, he wished a good road. For about 2 minutes, Ryu looked at the guests before you go to the tavern. On the road, Chikon constantly pulled his daughter and rushed himself. Chan's cheeks engulfed the heat of thoughts about the future. And his father was inspired by the daughter's future wedding. Meat with vegetables appetically fell from the board in a frying pan, and the wind played the street lanterns playfully. Ryu was skillfully engaged in cooking, but on the side, it looked as if he had staged a show with fire. He gradually brought the pan to perfect anneal. A lot of time has passed from Chikon's visit, so the man sent a letter to which a lot of money and a maid was said. When one of the twins entered the tavern, Ryu immediately remembered her. It was a girl who constantly wanted to quench her famine. The cook treated her with jakjangyim, and instead received his money. On the resulting silver, he decided to fully improve his tavern. It began to look like a full-story hotel. Ryu carefully prepared delicious dishes according to his own recipes. But the dining room of the updated tavern remained empty. Only one of the twins voted, creating the illusion that someone is. The upset boy began to think that this business should be closed. Against the background of the girl's crunching, he almost did not depression. Suddenly, someone's strong hand opened the door of the establishment. What made the owner rejoiced in childhood joy, many people have been taunting. It was a whole detachment of the soldier in the same form, with the same weapon and the same expression. Having lost, Ryu Chonvan invited to sit at the tables. He did not keep up with the servant. Among the servicemen, a bald-haired elderly man with a strange, alarming smile looked around. "Greetings." Ryu wanted to take an order. He was genuinely pleased with so many guests. Lightning, the soldiers' crowd tied the maid and Ryu Chonvan. The guy did not have time to notice. Having realized his current situation, the cook was covered with sweat and acquired the color of marble. It was led to a huge thematic building with high fence and aesthetic columns. He was met by military personnel who carelessly ate a piece of meat on the bone. Ryu stared at the sides, not understanding anything until the bald servant filled the glass with water to the edges of his gentleman. Mr. was Shim Uhena, by Darien. He drank cool water. Ryu wanted to justify himself, not understanding what. One of the soldiers aggressively hit the floor with a weapon, from which the guy with his maid fell to the other side. While the gentleman tasted the noodles, he was subordinate to the state of Taverna Ryu Chonvon. The attacker motioned on Darien put dishes, and the remains of food flew around. His subordinate unfolded the scroll and began to blame the young cook of non-existent crimes. Ryu listened to it all and immediately thought that it could all be a cheap base. The subordinate shouted a terrible sentence for him. He shouted about injustice, but the soldier, without spending time, he was pushed by the boy with his foot in his back. And then, all his mass, the serviceman came to him, showing his superiority, which triggered the token from Ryu's clothing. Mr. quietly ordered to calm down. Subsequently, he noticed the lost blue token with the initials of the John. Quite carelessly, he rushed to the floor to lift it, throwing off dishes, food, appliances, and table. Having picked up the find, he was covered with cold sweat, and his hands covered his tremor. Having posed a threat to a young cook, the gentleman was waiting for the answer. Instead, he was silent, and the majestic man shouted his versions. Ryu did not lie, but calmly spoke from where he had this token. The gentleman was angry with a standing soldier nearby. Narring his teeth, he turned to his servant. Then he swung a large and heavy stick, and he struck his subordinate with all his strength, knocking out a couple of teeth. The latter flew into one of the walls with such power that it broke it. Ryu Chonvon looked at it with surprise, because he thought that he had to be in the place of the subordinate. The honorable gentleman justified the cook with a squeaky voice because he did not joke. The servant, choosing from the defeat, splashed the blood and reminded the order. From his last words, the gentleman began to beat his unfortunate legs, because no one dares to contradict him. After this incident in the yard, dust from the destroyed constructions came up, and the servant will spend his life behind bars. The gentleman came to Ryu. The guy seemed unusual because not every day the district judge addresses you. The latter accepted the ropes from Ryu Chonvon, talking about close connections. With an awkward smile and holding the rope in his hands, he continued to say strange things. The house of the district judge looked gorgeous. The balance of colors and the qualitatively made parts only emphasized the position of the owner. One of the twins, who became a maid of RJ, could not bring her eyes off from so many food. The young guy was also delighted with such an appetizing lunch and dishes he first saw with his own eyes. Thank you. They began to taste the hotels. With a concerned expression, Darien emphasized his family ties again and again. Ryu listened to him, believing every word. Tears of happiness came from the unsurpassed taste of noodles. The judge looked at Ryu Chonvon and, changing the grimaces, thought of his connection with the majestic clan Chagall. The maid was always so hungry that she was ready to take food from her master. Walking cold then, the gentleman hoped that Ryu liked everything. Noticing the constant change of the expression of the face in the guest, he asked his emotions. But, of course, the gentleman did not admit anything. Noticed that the judge did not touch any treats. He delicately asked the moral condition of his visa. Changing the theme of the conversation, a highly man began a story about the flowering culture of his hometown. From excitement, tears almost turned. The gentleman, filled with nostalgia, said that his hometown was famous for many seas and many fish, shrimps, crabs, and oysters, as well as natural stone giants, which was washed with salty marine waves. He loved to look at the calm sea and mountains in the distance on the horizon, but to cherish dreams of your best future on the shore of one of the seas. Returning to reality, he became sad because he realized that he had not reached the desired. Ryu Chonvon thoughtfully touched his chin. Subsequently, he rose from the table with a sharp movement, which caused a fright in the district judge. Wearing his legendary red dressing for cooking, the young and ambitious guy solemnly offered his cook's services. The sun shone a 2-story building of a district judge on Darien. In the kitchen of Ryu Chonvon, he gave his assistant commands. The latter diligently followed the instructions of the cook. Taking a sharp knife with his right hand, Ryu began to cook. With a serious expression, he began to cut into small slices marble beef. According to diligent work, the chef did not notice the 2 attractive girls who looked at him. Plugs of meat with vegetables and melted butter were fried on the pan. The girls asked a couple of questions of the maid about the young cook. One of the twins did not lose the opportunity to rage with Raya that he did not like it. He professional drops of salty sweat with a back surface of the palm. While preparing, the cook remembered the facial expression on the story of his native seaside town. Subsequently, he got a large bowl from, while still alive, marine inhabitants. There were a blue crab, which was divided into 2 halves at one point, giant shrimp, whose looked into the soul, and also mussels, which could not be guessed about their further fate. On the hellish fire, the sea broth was boiling, and Ryu began to prepare seasonings. Looking at a bright flame, the young chef came up with a new name for almost a ready meal. While Ryu Chonvon was skillfully stirring the broth, the effect of a dancing fire was created around the movie. Two surprised Mr. Poe servicemen were looking at this spectacle. The next step in cooking exquisite dishes with seafood was the preparation of paste, but adding aromatic orange oil like sunset on the coast. Hearing the aroma of almost ready dish, one of the girls closed her eyes, trying to breathe as deeply as possible. The maids were ready to fall in love with the young cook simply because he was sophisticated. Having received the perfect result of the dish, the face of the Ryu blossomed in a smile. The cook came out of the kitchen and solemnly handed the dish. The latter looked at a huge amount of mussels, shrimp, noodles, and saturated broth in the vessel in front of him. He thoughtfully touched his chin, asking what this dish is called. Subsequently, he recruited a little broth into the spoon without taking his eyes. Meanwhile, Ryu presented the dish vigorously and emotionally. After learning the name of his dinner, he tasted, especially without counting on anything. After a second, his cheeks were filled with a blush, and his eyebrows showed the emotion of pleasure. The district judge realized that he had never mastered such gastronomic sensations. Now that his gaze fell on the dish, he saw a part of his hometown. Without listening more, he continued to eat noodles carelessly, but with such force that it seemed that the wind began to walk indoors. Ryu Chonvan tried to stay on his feet because the airflow was strong. The district judge did not notice how he was in another reality. A young boy with an evil expression sat in front of him. The new moon recognized himself in an old-fed district judge. He began to blame the older version of himself of crimes and tension increased between them. Waving his hands, the district judge began to justify his actions loudly. The guy did not respond to the noise from his older version. He came up and leaned over him, touching his left soft cheek. From such an unusual action, Rumyanets covered his face on. The boy bowed and their lips crossed in a gentle kiss for the judge to be ashamed. A bright pink glow swept the whole house and its boundaries, based on the rays through the window frames. Returning to the real dimension, he was already overwhelmed with the empty container in front of him. The district judge delicately addressed the RU, shocking him. After the kiss, the honorable gentleman gained a different look from the fate. Seeing and listening to his speech, the face of Ryu Chonvan was poured with water. However, the clerk of the cook liked the new look of the judge. The same night was a bright full moon that was hanging over the huge house on Darnan. Under the dull light from the orange flashlight, the judge tiredly signed the scrolls one by one. 2 minutes later, he read a new sentence for Ryu Chonvan. Subsequently, he apologized for all the inconvenience that happened in the last day. Having put his hands in the castle, he began a business conversation with the taverna owner. Taking his hair, Ryu became aware of the master's questions. The only source of lighting in the room was the orange cylindrical flashlight. Darian suggested his help for the development of a deserted tavern. The door opened, forming a light breeze, and 2 men appeared on the doorstep. They began to greet with a Ecadine smile, becoming more convenient. Ryu could not but pay attention to it, so he returned to them in surprise. One man with a piercing of the ear and a weird hairstyle on the right side was the genius of cooking, and the other said he was knowing the drinks. At once they began to perform strange movements, and then they began to pose unconventional. Ryu Chonvan was not very delighted with such help, and the maid was fascinated by the pose of 2 men. The horizon shows huge mountains of rocky fossils that were kindly allowed to cover themselves with green shrubs. A company of 4 people went from the 2-story building of the district judge on Darien. Coming to the destination, Chan and Bayon began to criticize the structure and its location relative to the road and other settlements. At once, he noticed a huge mistake by Ryu Chonvan, which did not allow tavernments to gain popularity. He screamed loudly, waving his hands and jumping in place. Ryu, embarrassed by scratching the area behind his ear, asked, "What's the matter?" The cylindrical flashlight in orange was immediately thrown into the eyes, which was quietly hanging at the entrance to the establishment. Hugging, Chin ordered the maid to remove the lamp as far away. Ryu, thinking that men were warning ghosts, looking at the lantern, asked. A man with a weird hairstyle in a green kimono shouted the taverna Kazian, which is very important. After all, the lanterns of the cylindrical shape of such material mean that the tavern is closed. Ryu, without waiting for such information, faded, covered with sweat, and fell into a stupor. He focusedly began to wander in the memories of the body, in which he was destined to reincarnate, touching his chin. According to it, only how in the past it was stupidly waved by a stick on the bank of the reservoir. He reassured Bion, and the maid got rid of the flashlight until Ryu returned to reality. Finally, they decided to go inside, not noticing that they were followed from the forest bushes. It was a rather attractive girl in the hood who lost a little gift of language a little. Only a company of 4 tavern workers entered the room. Then the important scrolls immediately flew. Intensely, as the owner of the tavern, it began to sign all the papers and prepare tax accounts. In this occupation, it seemed to him that time was endless. Chan tried to remember what more points should be done to legalize the tavern. and he helped him in this. The little maid, as usual, could not calm her appetite. Ryu Chonvon was acquainted with all the papers he signed. At this point, men in the green and pink kimono began to look at the institution. But to the surprise for them, they did not find the one they were looking for. Immediately, they thought about their plan, and Ryu Chonvon finished signing important papers. After that, the men inspired and joyfully announced the search for the waiter. 3 serious candidates for this position were already in front of them. Ryu and his servants did not like the idea of the boys. The first called a man with a green bandage on the head and gathered hair. At this moment, the taverna owner would seem like this idea. Lightning, the candidate, 1, began to read his author's rap about the tavern and her workers. From the herd, Chonvon burst, and his eyes seemed to be filled with white paint. The last line was wound so that the saliva flew out of the candidate's mouth. He liked his song and charisma, but was against such behavior for the waiter. Candidate number 1 was almost unanimously disqualified from the selection. Ryu Chonvon did not want to hire someone else to work in his institution, because there were 4 of them. But at this time he began to shout at him. He explained that this is an important position that should be in every tavern. He immediately agreed with the fright, though he did not consider it. Chan announced the continuation of the waiters. Candidate number 2 with careless hair sang a song, imagining that a spoon is his microphone. What from the beast began to turn crystal tears in the eyes. Candidate number 3 in the yellow kimono sang a song of another repertoire, and the maid in the fascinated was fascinated at him, without taking his eyes. Then the last candidate filled the dance number, and then quite high ratings were given except the maid. Ryu Chonvon was all reminiscent of more talents, but this action has continued for a very long time. Potential waiters sang loudly. The maid ate noodles at this time. Someone imagined that he was playing a tune on a guitar, holding inventory for sweeping a floor. A fight began from the intense atmosphere between the candidates. The maid was dissatisfied with the food. Ryu Chonvon began to speak softly, and then he could not stand, and struck on the table behind which he sat, stood up. From his cold tone of voice, everyone was frightened. During this time, Ryu came to the conclusion that he did not need another employee. He agreed with him and let everyone go home. Bede and the maid, on the contrary, were only upset. They began to talk quietly Ryu Chonvon because it seemed strange to them. The tavern owner exhaled with relief and called everyone to work. Suddenly the door opened and a frightened girl in gray clothes appeared on the doorstep. She was recognized immediately. She fell to her knees and began to be pleased to give her a chance to become a waitress. A man in a green kimono and a weird hairstyle began to remember this girl from their last conversation. The girl removed the hood and named her name. After removing gray clothes, a girl with lush forms of dreamy appearance sat in front of them. She wanted to refuse her, because he usually took only men to the post, but Ryu stopped him. The latter hired a girl, despite her ban on 8 minutes ago. She lacrimally began to thank the young taverna owner for his work. He became discouraged and what faced the blush. A new sign appeared in the very center of the dining room. On the same day, the little maid began to change all the tavern lanterns, and Ryu Chonvon issued an advance with silver ingots of a new waitress. From joy, she fell to the floor, accelerating the dust around, and began to thank her new manager. Raising, Chu wiped her crystal tears, and something thought about her. A few minutes later, while he wore important scrolls, he suggested changing a couple of details inside the tavern. Towards the evening, the maid was carefully hanging the last flashlight from the roof. Suddenly, the bell that hung over the door began to make sounds, which meant only one. Everyone immediately paid attention to this sound. A friendly new waitress rushed to the first taverna client. A man with a big scar on his left cheek helped to make an unpleasant smile on his face. Ryu Chonvon is faded, because he recognized in this man a man through whom a fight occurred a couple of months ago, destroying half a tavern. The robber, confidently entering, also recognized the owner and his tavern. His enemies entered the room with him. The pale Ryu Chonvon, wiping his eyes, tried to come to his senses. The robbers surrounded one of the tables and put their sharp weapons on him. The new waitress chum rushed to them and with a smile on her face wanted to take an order from clients. But her scared manager intercepted before she had 2 steps. Hiding under the table, Ryu began to explain to her the situation. Meanwhile, fierce enemies discussed a future fight. The chef was desperately on his arms and sighed hard, knowing what would be 4 minutes. They heard the story of Ryu and quietly crawled to him under the table. The cook continued the story of the fighting of the same people on the first day of the tavern. A man in yellow clothes stood up on a wooden table, aggressively proving his point of view. He put his inference regarding the status of Taverna Ryu Chonvon. At this point, the loud sound of the impact came. Ryu was reflexively paying attention to it. The fight began sharply and at one time, and although everyone expected it, but no one understood anything. Ryu Chonvon's cheeks soaked tears, and all other companions were frightened. A sharp metal weapon went into the fight. It got an iron tub for protection and called for something. Chugarino spoke in defense of her leader. The maid began to reflect from the thieves due to her hunger. The waitress pressed Ryu to herself, namely to a rather intimate place. In the next second, she used her dear cook as a shield to defense against sharp weapons. Ryu was sprinkled with cold sweat from such action. Chingarin. His voice broke out on a cry from fright. After a second, the girl nearly flew a table with a statute man, but she had time to bounce left. Ryu Chonvon called on to run from the tavern, and from the danger that was indoors. A girl with purple hair and guards who came to the establishment at this time heard strange sounds. Suddenly the door opened and Ryu Chonvon almost knocked down a young girl with a neat hairstyle. The cook was surprised at this moment. In the next moment, Chick pressed him to the girl in purple gorgeous clothes. Without disappointed, the girl grabbed the young boy for a strand of hair that always looked into Ryu. Even more frightened cooks surrounded the guards of this mysterious girl. The latter began to threaten the boy, because she did not like such actions in her side. After learning who she was holding the strand, the girl was surprised. Suddenly a man in yellow clothes knocked the wall with his body. The gorgeous girl was annoyed from these events in the morning. She ordered her ninja guardians to deal with the taverna invaders. Not long thinking sparkling knives flew into the room and stuck in tables. Instead, there was a loud explosion. This attracted attention and scared the invaders. With serious intentions, the fighting girl went to the tavern. Having announced her plans, she ordered everyone to leave the tavern. The sworn enemies did not recognize the threat and began to respond to her. The man in the yellow bandana was Vowel until he was stopped by a one-eyed guy in a gray kimono. Suddenly, a huge metal needle was stuck in the palm of the first. With an achidous smile, a girl with purple hair began to speak. The one-eyed invader with scars began to analyze the girl in front of him. He stood in front of him, Tan, daughter of the leader of the Tan sect, nicknamed a poisonous butterfly. A minute later, the hand of a man in which the needle with the poison began to decompose. And then it was completely outside, showing her power. Tan continued to speak, licking her weapon. The confused man in the yellow accidentally injured the only eye of his opponent, waving the affected limb. There was a loud cry of two male people. And the next second, all the invaders left the taverna room with loud screams. The strand of Chonvona was still in the hands of spectacular Tan. She ordered him to prepare her specialty dish. Immediately he began to roast the juicy meat with vegetables and sauce on a heated pan. Thinking about this mysterious girl, and the dangerous greatest Tan sect, Ryu Chonvon actively mixed the contents of the cast iron pan. And then the branded dish of Taverna Ryu was already ready for use. Before eating, Tan seemed like the smell of paste. But when she took the sticks, Ryu still noticed strange things. When talking about his thoughts, about the tactics of Tan holding sticks, he heard him, and he explained that the index and middle fingers of the girl carry poison, so it is absolutely impossible for them to touch food. From this, Ryu realized where the poison came from: the needles, which Tan reads so skillfully. Having licked her fragile lips, she began to skeptically taste the dish. Ryu Chonvon was convinced of his food, so a verdict of the exquisite guest waited on his face with a smile. In those days, a dried paste was made from thin dough. It turned out to be brittle so much that it was impossible to chew it. After tasting, Tan opened her eyes wide. Ryu Chonvon prepares his paste exclusively with his hands. He applies his knowledge from the past life, so at that time his paste is a rare artifact for fans of exquisite cuisine. Ryu mixes the dough with its skilled, strong hands for a few hours. Tan jumped out of such a soft paste. Subsequently, she ate her portion like a hungry man. The grimaces on her face were changed one by one from pleasure. In praising the range of tastes, it got up dynamically. As it happens with everyone who tastes the paste, Tan seems to be a cross from this unusual taste. The next second, she lost consciousness that scared her guards. Ryu Chonvon immediately mentioned the situation with anaphylactic shock by John a couple of months ago, but the girl began to cough and come to her senses. Taking it for red clothes, Tan gave off insulting words with a sneaky smile on her face. Subsequently, she made a compliment the skills of Ryu cooking, chasing it into a stupor. A girl with a purple hairstyle was convinced of the words of her sister John. Ryu Chonvon reached for the red-eyed cheek tan. It was to check her overall well-being. But she took this action as a gesture of a courtyard from the side of the cook. Immediately, she struck the guy with a heavy scroll on his face. From such a sharp slap, he fell to the floor, lifting dust on himself. And the purple-haired girl was as angry as possible. Her face became red. Getting in a position, she shouted for the close connection of Ryu with a powerful clan. Chose and the lots who sat in the iron tub noticed the same scroll, the scroll of the Chagall clan. It reminded the angry Tan that she came to the tavern to pass the seal. Ryu Chonvon stood with a curved neck and a full face of surprise. The boys from the tub did not get lost, and began to read the link from the elders of the Tang clan. The scroll said about the anniversary of the king himself, Tan Bi Ren. After the face heard, Ryu Chonvon became marble, because he was to be present there instead of Chegal Chon. Raising his head, he noticed the Tan, who urged him to get together. They needed to reach the holy lands of the Tanchenda sect as soon as possible. They represented multi-story houses of the time in dark colors. The emperor and founder of these lands was Liu Bei, a man in a majestic red-green kimono, a specific headdress and aesthetic mustache. Ryu Chunvon flowed down until he pulled huge and voluminous bags with things. Meanwhile, the maid in tan ate donuts with white icing. Ryu felt like a slave, because he carried things of all his companions. He treated this trip with all seriousness, so he refused to give more food. But the tan had again grabbed his hair and showed that she could not refuse. These donuts were considered food for soldiers, and prepared from rice dough to maintain the shelf life as long as possible. But Ryu changed the recipe and took wheat flour instead, and then covered it with melted sugar and got a glazed donut. The tired cook thought of how to keep food for longer. But the tan, her guards and Ryu's maid, ate everything right away. Walking through thorny forests, the guy remembered his tavern, more precisely the moment when he was forcibly taken with him. He did not like to go where, and it was unknown with anyone. But he tried to enjoy the landscapes. The night came. A bright moon was lifted in the sky, which carefully gave the light of the earth and a loud source. Ryu Chanvon, under the guidance of his small maid, laid out a tent, and the bodyguards did not want to help him. What the guy was upset and very tired. Suddenly, he noticed that ladies with purple hair began to cook. The latter offered him a plate with soup, talking about his grandfather's mentoring. Waiting for the evaluation of the dish, she looked at Ryu. The guy, in turn, did not wait long to wait for the reaction. He grabbed the mouth with tears in his eyes. Before his eyes, there was an image that the dish could have poison, because her girl was prepared from the Tang clan. The Tan began to explain the specifics of the food. Ryu Chonvon fell into a stupor. At one point he illuminated his memory, the memory of an ancient recipe for soup with moss stones. Tan looked at his reaction. Suddenly he grabbed a complex table. He began to spread it quickly. The maid got vegetables and pancakes from the bag, and the purple-haired girl simply watched the action. Utensils, foods, tables flew into the air. Ryu was skillfully caught. The diligent actions of the boy were forced the girl to watch with him. The young cook began to cook the same soup that had already prepared it. The full moon was gently illuminated around. After 40 minutes, the paste with stone broth was ready. Skeptically, the girl tasted dishes. But skepticism on her face quickly replaced with pleasure. She did not understand how Ryu managed to change the taste, so. After that, he asked how he succeeded. He answered properly. He also told about a personal ingredient for the lady. But she could not believe in such a difficult recipe. Demonstrously thickened her index finger in Ryu and repeated her question. In turn, the young cook began to tell her the history of cooking and several terms and secrets. After listening, the girl's face became red. During his speech, Ryu hid the same secret ingredient. The Tan rise behind the guy, and after grabbing her clothes, she turned at 180 degrees. Ryu told about the secret of his dishes, but the girl did not hear him. She reached for a guy kiss. Taking the opportunity, the maid began to eat more and faster. The guard prevented the kiss of the lady. From what he saw was sprinkled with cold, sticky sweat. After shouting, it began to justify. 5 minutes later, a tent crack came. A long-haired health with a large, sharp sword appeared before the Tan. He asked in surprise what she was doing in the forest. The girl was frightened by the chunky species of Jibu. Alongside him came the same huge associates. Finally, removing the dishes from his face, Ryu Chonvon faded and was covered with fright. From ancient times, Green Forest was considered a giant criminal group. Courageously inserting the weapon into the ground before the Tan, he repeated his question again, from which the girl was even more frightened. Suddenly, Jibu Ibu began to be embarrassed, hiding behind his medium-length hair. He began to mention the events of several days ago. They, with other members of the clan, lined with fried meat with fresh beer in one of the forest tavern. Cheja complained about his shameful skills of communicating with girls. He was tired of a constant male atmosphere. After auditing the conversation, another member of the group approached them and reminded the newcomer, Chue Zhong. The latter began to tell the algorithm of acquaintance with the girl. This conversation seemed interesting for other members of the institution. At one time, Ibu Iba returned to reality, where a nice girl with purple hair, a young cook, as well as a guard of the Tang clan stood in front of him. The face of a giant chunky man blossomed in a smile with a note, which looked quite malicious. Ryu Chonvon's hair stood up with a great look. The Tan Yan explained the purpose of her location in the forest. The men who stood behind the Chaja supported him. The girl continued to speak until Ryu trembled with fear. Suddenly, a man with a huge sword stopped and a smile disappeared from his face. This was driven into the stupor of Tan, Ryu Chanvon, and the guard. The Cheja and his friends silently returned to his backs to the young company. The panic man began to complain about the possible ending of the dialogue with the girl. The journey company drew attention to the negotiation of health. Other men began giving the advice of Chajibu. The latter pretended to understand everything. And again he turned to the girl, hiding his hair. Very literally understanding his associate, he began to wave his sword, even more frightened by the young. The face of the advisor was sprinkled with cold sweat because he did not mean it. From the sharpness of actions, Yen and Ryu took 2 steps back. Chaj leaned to the guard, which caused him a panic tremor. The next was the maid, but because of its small size, he decided not to touch. At the same moment, a sharp blade of huge weapons appeared in the face of Ryu, as well as a giant with an Ecadine smile. Without thinking for a long time, she spent its needles from under the sleeve, but raising her hand soaked them in the poison, and she got into protection in front of a frightened cook. From the tension, the guard of the scolder and Ryu happily supported the girl. The companions of the change were also lagging behind. The guard began to express his conclusions, from which the chef was dissatisfied, and it stood as tense as 2 minutes ago. Suddenly a cheat ghost swept the fire of the spring. The girl tried to reassure him, scared. From the touch of Tan Nin, the man rushed from the nose. Coming to the place of arrival, Ryu began to look at the city. It was a multi-story house in majestic, spooky tones. Inside was purple fog and snake statuettes. They were already waiting for the legendary Dad Tan. It was a big man with a cradle in his left hand and long mustache. From so many poisoned fog, Ryu began to suffocate. But the majestic Tanjavun did not pay attention to it. From the words of the Lord of Poison, the cook was happy. The king asked something about a sight with a smile on his face. The latter gave a sign how to answer. Ryu lied, remembering how everything really was. With a sincere smile, the Lord gave the house a cook. Cooking from the fog, the latter thanked him. Remembering the words of Chigal Chon about Ryu Chonvon, the Junin concluded that the cook is an ordinary guy. Smoking, he did not understand why this guy Chkan wanted to give out his daughter. In the midst of a deep night, under the moonlight, did not sleep only a few. Chigal Chkan and Tan Junin were dialogue, drinking delicious drinks, and they also tasted elite chicken dishes. A representative of the Tan clan complained about his daughter's fighting passion. Drinking a drink from a glass, Chon talked about the health of John. The Junin, biting the dishes, cheered it. Subsequently, they began to think about the image of their son-in-law, and under the cover of the night, their hands squeezed. The Tan, with a panic appearance, gave instructions to Ryu about his father. When he was looking at his guests, the Junin was happy, and then suddenly remembered the family status of his daughter. The Tang clan covered traditional dishes on the table. Kinkali, seafood and chicken in sauce. She made a kinkali, and then with appetite she tasted noodles with chicken. While eating, she remembered the culinary skills of Ryu Chonvon, and then she became thinking about his personal comfort in a new place. The remnants of delicious food were visible on the table. Ryu, red with pleasure, was taken with hot water. Having reached out to the towel, he thought about creating a similar one in his tavern. Subsequently, he began to dive, until he plunged completely. At one point, the hand began to see. Ryu Chonvon was frightened. The angry Tan came into the room where the cook was happy, and she began to look for the ladder. From the fright of Ryu Chonvon, he broke a vat with water, spraying the water around. He later thought about him. Seeing the naked Ryu, it blushed. The young cook began to be embarrassed and waved with his hands. The voice of Tan Yen broke to a cry, and then she swung her hand at the boy. What was the dust and loud sound? The mutilated Ryu apologized to the girl. Subsequently, he translated the topic, correcting his clothes. The Tan was accompanied by Ryu Chonvon during a walk in the yard. The maid reached for suspicious mushrooms. The guy did not like this walk. It was covered with cold, sticky sweat from the thoughts of the elder. The lake floated weird fish. The guy looked around the vegetation. The Tan reminded him of what her clan was famous for. Subsequently, they reached their destination. Before Ryu Chonvon, an unsurpassed landscape opened in tender purple. He was complimentary to such a spectacle. The petals tickled his nose. But from the words, the harmony has changed to anxiety. The guy fell to the ground. He was worried about a great weird huge frog. The chef was frightened of its size. A man of elderly was sitting on the head of the frog. The girl was glad to see her grandfather. It was Tanbi Ren, the elder of the clan. Subsequently, the grandson and grandfather, who missed one after the other, began a warm dialogue. Ryu Chonvon was still hiding behind the back of a joyful girl. The guy offended the frog with his statements. A minute later, he became aware that the nickname of the animal, Hong Sumi. Tanbi Ren reached for mushrooms with poison and said things. It was blushed and stepped back, and then, waving her hands, denied what his grandfather said. From where the Scorpio came to jumped on the hair of a frightened Rue. Hong Sum did not delay and ate him immediately until he explained the boy's personality. Bai Ren, touching his mustache, agreed with his granddaughter. From this dialogue, the Chonvona Ryu appeared even more sweat, and the eyes were whitewashed. Biren already wanted to leave, but the loud words of the granddaughter made him stop. The girl from the fright was discontinuing and her eyes expanded. Grandpa, with a strange smile, returned 180 degrees. A dangerous poisonous wasp flew nearby. Biren continued his opinion. What is the Chonwon Ryu is covered with cold sweat drops. He then suggested that he show his culinary skills. She watched them with curiosity, and then she was angry. But Ryu was ready to conclude a couple for his tavern. Tan Biren introduced a new condition about his pet, but the cook did not understand him at first. And then he fell into a stupor. The grandfather continued the conversation as he climbed on the frog. The last phrase from the mouth of the Bijo was threatened. Ryu Chonvon watched as the elder quickly left his place of stay, and then he spoke with the hope of hearing comfort. But he did not wait for the last. He grabbed Ryu for a bang, which always sticks to him, and she pulled the field of purple flowers everywhere. Subsequently, they were in front of a strange room. The girls went to huge doors and began to open them. From the first one who saw the cook, his eyes were reflexively opened. He did not hold back the emotions of delight. She explained that this room is the composition of her clan. Looking at, Ryu noticed a lot of cabbage, potatoes, meat, and greens, and he reached for his secret ingredient. And then he gave up the proposal of yen. Taking a few vegetables in his hands, Ryu asked his preferences, and immediately received the answer to his question. And then he began to look for suitable products. The bright glow rushed into his face. Ryu smiled sight, and immediately he was happy about Chili's pepper. Among the huge stones and purple poisonous flowers, he was already waiting for a hungry grandfather, as well as a maiden frog. The old man returned to feedback, and he saw a noble cook with a dish in his hands. Ryu Chonvon is revered to remove the lid from the plate, and everyone appetized a spicy dish, mapo tofu with white rice. But at first glance, the elder was dissatisfied. Having tasted, he opened a new spectrum of taste. From pleasure, he rolled his head and went out of his nose. Ryu gave its recommendations. From the sharpness of the taste, the elder became a ripe tomato, and then he started eating faster and faster. It was concerned about eating. Ryu smiled, looking at the elder's appetite. He throwed a piece of tofu upwards, and then skillfully waved a sharp knife. He cut it into small cubes for better chewing. Subsequently, he roasted the tofu in oil to create a crunchy crust. The next was chili pepper. Having made a red sauce, Ryu dipped the cubes of roasted tofu and skillfully mixed everything for even cooking. The grandfather was completely red from sharpness, but his grimaces were not given a sight. Ryu Chonvon joyfully put his hands near his chest and smiled sincerely. The elder did not stop, and the cook continued to watch him. Grandpa was like a trance, like all previous clients of Ryu Chonvon. It seemed that at one point, from the sharpness of the dish, everything around became orange. When Bi-Rin almost finished eating, he was tired. He exhaled the sharp couple, and the last piece remained, who went into the cheers. A few seconds were all right, until it seemed that everything around the ward and his grandfather became burgundy, which meant that the dish was extremely spicy. The wind was kindly walking with a purple lawn. Smiling from pleasure, the elder praised a dish that he had just eaten. Ryu Chonvon got into a pose of gratitude. The Tanny watched them in surprise. Gentle Bi-Rin offered his services, and then he turned to his pet. A few days later, the young cook sat on one of the rocks and thought, remembering his tavern and partners. He caught him suddenly, listening to his reflections, and she suggested to follow the preparation for the party. Ryu happily agreed. The girl threw him from the rock, and they went to their destination. After a while, a company of 3 people reached the main kitchen. When the Raya entered, he was almost knocked down by one of the workers with huge drawers. Looking around, he saw that there were a lot of cooks. The little maid ate carrots secretly. She saw one of the unfinished dishes in front of her and woke up with a feeling of hunger. This dish was lamb meat. Suddenly, the chief chef Zhang himself entered the kitchen. He turned to the Tan. Blindly breakfast, she answered his question, and Ryu greeted at the same time. There were main dishes, snacks, and raw meat on the tables. Invincible Ryu Chonvon explained where his tavern is. From the reaction of the boss, the young cook has changed facial expression. The chef has called his name. From his intonation, a sense of anxiety appeared. And Ryu Chonvon remembered the situation from his past life. Zhang himself granted permission to monitor his cooking. What the young cook was joyful. Subsequently, Yen and the little maid noticed something interesting. Ryu recognized this dish. It was sasua, a dish of crab meat. In the sake of this species and aroma, salivation began, which is not surprising. The boss praised Ryu Chonvon's knowledge in cooking and wanted to leave. But the last statement of the taverna owner stopped him. He returned with horror for 180 degrees. Ryu pointed to strange spots of black, and then explained why they appeared at all, and he continued to criticize the chefs. From the latter, the chef's voice broke into a cry. He knocked out a plate from the hands of Ryu Chonvon. However, the latter felt a strange smell. Jang himself continued to shout at the guy because he offended him. On the floor, a precisely spoiled dish was visible. Ryu, covering his face, realized that the smell had tried to cover with spices. He later expressed his opinion, which he received a new portion of cry and image. Suddenly, Tan Junin came into the kitchen. Jang himself immediately began to complain and slammed the young boy. The surprised head of the Tank clan asked in Ryu. The latter began to express his opinion. Looking at the dishes on the table, he gave examples, and then confidently spoke the last phrase. And it seems that he was believed. The Javyun offered them cooking competitions. The results will reveal the best cook. The chef did not like it, and he started screaming again. The head of the clan tried to comfort him. Subsequently, Ryu got a token, showing his involvement in the Chigal clan. With the smile of Tanjunin confirmed it. And then he put out his condition for the losing one. The waiters began to place dishes on the backyard. The understanding of what can happen, Ryu has been panic. The Junin announced the theme of the competition, and the young cook agreed with confidence. There was a lawn illuminated by the sun. Tan Junin made a pleasant speech, but Tan Biren was bored. Guests sat around a huge table covered with food. Zhang quickly prepared culinary masterpieces. The guests who came for the celebration were admired by the table. Tan Junin continued to talk about his chefs. Ryu Chonvon carried out hand trimming before creating masterpieces. The old Tan clan was surprised to see a young chef. Lifting a glass, the Junie announced the theme of the competition. Those who participated looked at each other. The head of the clan, raising his hand, allowed him to start. Looking at a bowl, I asked many questions in Ryu. The latter answered her sharply. He remembered his past life and that he had to cook. Some guest was surprised when he saw that he would cook the cook. It was a poisonous fugue fish. Zhang laughing at the guy, Ryu took a special knife skillfully, and in one stroke made a rick on the fish. Subsequently, he put the fish in a bowl of water, explaining the safety of it. Some people were not delighted with this dish. Ryu Chonvon requested that he was awarded the help that the latter regarded as orders, but still helped. The young cook was able to use sharp objects. Tan Biren was delighted, and the head of the clan smiled eagerly. Zhang himself vigorously prepared his dish. Hunger woke up from his food. The cook was happy with such reactions. Even Tan Junin praised him. Zhang himself behaved from above, relative to Ryu Chonvon. Guests began to taste with pleasure. However, the grimace of joy was distorted when the cook saw that the old man had not tried. Ryu Chonvon commented on the situation. What was interested in Tan Juni? The young cook began to talk about his knowledge in royal cooking. Zhang began to justify himself. Hearing about the composition of the dish, the guests were coherent. The main ingredient of food was pork. Tan Biren began his speech. Zhang was very frightened. He immediately remembered his poor childhood. His mum sometimes prepared pork dishes with vegetables. He mentioned constant images from other people, and as he failed to get a job, Zhang himself began to lie about his teacher. But he was trusted, and he continued to work in cooking. Everyone was talking about him. What did Zhang rejoiced? Returning from the memories, he saw the angry king of poison. The latter rose from the table, scared by a false cook, but the king only turned to Ryu Chonvon. Zhang himself fell into a stupor. Ryu Chonvon finished cooking. He put his dish on the table, sashimi. All guests were surprised and frightened at the same time, including the head of the Tang clan. The Tanny brought another portion. The symbol of the Tang clan was fish fillets. The first was to taste Tanbi Ren. So it happened. The guests were looking forward to the reaction. The elder began to cough, which frightened others, and he began to taste fully. One of the guests began to eat too, and then they started to taste everyone. Ryu Chonvon reassured the guests. People did not want to miss a single piece. Tan Junin enjoyed perfect taste. The Tan not behind him. Looking at it all, Ryu smiled. The Tang clan noticed a burst. But the elder was not surprised. The guests, noticing the dragon, were lost. And Ryu was surprised. Tan Junin was glad to see him. The head of the clan began to choose the winner of the competition. Of course, it was Ryu Chonvon with his new title, Culinary Dragon. Tanbi Ryan praised Ryu for his delicious food, and then he was angry with Zhang herself. He called his pet, and he ordered him to eat a cook. Zhang himself apologized. Ryu Chonvon shook the elder, and he stood sadly before Chan, closing the shameful cook. The Tan was frightened by the young cook. Ryu reminded of his desire. Tanbi Ryan listened carefully. The young chef expressed his request. At night, Ryu Chonvon said goodbye to Zhang himself. Before leaving, the latter asked the winner of the culinary competition. Ryu was covered with cold sweat listening to Zhang. The latter continued to ask questions. However, the chef calmly answered him the truth. Invincible touched his nape and smiled. After this conversation, Zhang himself returned to the memories of his childhood again. The little guy spoke his dream. His mother supported him, smiling, and she gave advice, preparing a delicious dinner. Little Zhang looked at her with burning eyes. Returning to reality, he wanted to go. The tears of treacherous made her eyes remembering her mother. Ryu tried to reassure him. Zhang confessed that he wanted to continue cooking. The young cook supported him in this. Thank him, Zhang got up in a traditional position, and he promised to change, turned and went away. Ryu Chunvan sat on a huge stone and looked at the starry sky. Subsequently, he began to watch the maid who caught insects. Ryu asked with interest about the name of his companion. Jumping from the place, she called her name. The maid gladly clapped his shoulder, because he was the first to ask this information. Holding his hand, the guy smiled. Time was later, so it was time that Ryu had already returned to his hotel. However, suddenly, Mrs. Tan appeared on the horizon, and her appearance was quite excited. Ryu naively thought that the girl was just hungry. But from how frightened she was, it was clear that something was more serious, and she needed his help. She could not cope with her emotions. She said that her father was only poisoned by Hayden. But how could it happen if he was preparing a fugue with such careful preparation and caution? It turns out to be Mrs. Tan prepared a dad fish, and though swore that she did everything according to the instructions of Raya, apparently did something wrong. In the evening, while he cut the fish, he told the girl about what parts of her parts were poisonous. It depended on the type of Hayden. As a rule, it was necessary to avoid blood and gills. The eyeballs and intestines, especially the liver, were also poisonous. When cutting each part on the knife, the poison could get, so the chef carefully made sure that his working tools were kept clean. One part of the fish was especially interested in the lady during cooking. These were testicles, non-poisonous edible parts of the fugue fish, which can be cooked in different ways. If they are very fresh, you can eat raw. Although the girl they caused some alertness, they were edible. For their taste and softness, these parts were also called breasts. And then the guy told the lady that if she is enough, she will definitely have the same delicious dish as he had. He was convinced of this because young Tan had a knife better than most chefs, so he was not familiar with rumors. It turns out to be careful in his words. When she told her father that Ryu taught her this recipe, he wanted to try, but the girl did not have the right experience to cook something so dangerous. The lady showed her dish to the cook, and as it turned out, she was cooked not from seeds, but from deadly poisonous ovaries. Ryu and Mrs. Tan immediately rushed towards the father who suffered from poisoning. The girl was in a state of crazy panic. Through one of her mistake, her father could now die, and the young man could not but blame himself because he did not explain to her properly and allowed this adventure to happen. Ms. said that at the table, her father was about the 2 o'clock. This means that it has been 4 hours since receiving poison, and therefore they need to hurry. The girl was very hoping that Ryu would be able to save the master, as he recently saved his sister Chon. But unfortunately, he could not promise anything, because even after 1,000 years, humanity did not come up with an antidote from the poison of fugu fish. But there was something they could try to do. Finally, they got the right place. The cook was surprised that the girl brought him to the guarded cave. Not only he, but the guards did not expect that the young lady would appear here. She said her father was inside the cave and called Raya to enter inside. But the guards prevented the lady to spend the boy inside, because they were forbidden to let strangers into the cave. Without the appropriate instructions, they could not let it inside. The patience of the girl was already over, so she grabbed one of the guards and said the killing and cold voice that they had no time for controversy. And after that she cut down both guards, so that they were no longer interfering with them under their feet. The code of honor of the family will not mean anything if there is no head, so this time it could afford to violate the rules. Ryu, along with the accompanying one, entered inside. When they went down, they noticed that in the depths of the caves, Mr. Tan sat seriously. He had probably just terrible. It seemed to the man that the whole eternity of his suffering had passed. The whole cave was imbued with a strange nuclear smoke which was most likely a poison. The man tried to displace the poison of the fugue fish from his body using his own. The girl's eyes again filled the strip of tears. She constantly asked her father forgiveness for what happened. Depletion, cyanosis, muscle spasms. The poisoning of the Lord was even stronger than Ryu thought. In view of everything, the man's technique was ineffective, so you couldn't lose a minute. Despite the fact that this poison was dangerous for the cook, it was not going to retreat. Through the sinus, the rose dropped the root of the flower aconite from the island of Kusashima. Aconite was incredibly dangerous and poisonous flower, so its appearance made others strain. Ryu was going to remove one poison with another poison. Yes, it sounds absurd, but there have been cases when this method worked. Fugu poison, tetrodotoxin, permucinously blocks the sodium channels of the body, paralyzing the muscles of fish, causing respiratory arrest and death. Aconite has the same effect on living organisms, but the mechanism of its action is opposite. It increases the permeability of sodium channels. In our world, the reception of both poisons would immediately lead a person to death, but the normality of the world in which Ryu was diametrically opposite to the one that was in his past life. Thanks to cultivation, these masters of martial arts are much broader than ordinary people, so they are much more susceptible to external stimuli. Of course, Ryu was not sure that it would happen to Mr. Joven if he took a second poison, but he did not have other ideas about how it could be helped. Therefore, he extended the flower to the man and asked to accept it. If he does nothing, then it will die, so there were not many options. This request was so strange for Jivan, he never heard of this method of antidote, but did not ask the young man about it. Instead, he asked his daughter and asked her whether she trusts Ryu Chanvon. She looked at the guy that he so desperately tried to help them, that she was even ready to sit here and pant her poison at her father, and she said confidently that she absolutely trusted this person. The man trusted his daughter and ate the flower that the chef gave him. As here, the amount of poisonous smoke released has increased hundreds of times, and the gentleman gave up a hard cry, clenching his teeth. The unmanaged explosion of poisonous smoke could be observed even far beyond the cave. It was so huge. The world in the eyes of Raya began to blur, until a terrible image of a village burning in the fire appeared before his eyes. The formidable warriors dreamed the streets in search of a witch's salt, ready to kill anyone who helps her. They were going to make her pay for the fact that she had betrayed Heavenly Dragon. In order to preserve the soldiers of life, they were warned in advance that they should not try to resist the technique of a woman called a web of 10 souls. Ryu revealed that when he was little, he found his father's death. The wounded father gave his son his last guidance and asked for that, and never think bad about his mother. After all, she gave up everything for the sake of love for them. And at this moment, the unhappy man found a terrible warrior, depriving him of his life. A frightened female voice snatched from the painful sleep of the boy. Mrs. Tian, wake him up. Memories of sleep immediately dispelled, and the chef remembered why he was in this cave. It seemed to him that everything was over, and his method did not work, for which he immediately began to apologize. But the lady suddenly hugged him. She was terribly worried about the young man when he lost consciousness, and her father miraculously survived due to the ingenuity of a young chef. Nothing could entertain the guy more than this news. At that moment, it seemed that the gentleman who looked quite cheerful. He was dissatisfied with the fact that his daughter was about a guy, but his grandfather, who suddenly appeared, advised him to simply not pay attention to this picture. The man regretted that he had lost pairs with Chon, making sure that Ryu was really a worthy bride. And since there were not many people worthy of the dragon in all the Middle Lands, it will be almost impossible to find the bridegroom for the groom's daughter. But it is possible to compare the bill and find someone at least as good as this ambitious young man. And the lady continued to face her face in the breast of the rescuer without holding back tears. So, the rest of the evening was quite calm. The next day came. Ryu gathered all his things to leave. He made all his travel to his backpack, prepared food on the road, and he needed nothing more. However, the thoughts of that strange dream of a burning village did not give him rest. These fragments were too real to be sleeping. But for some reason they were not in the memories of this body. Recently, so many tired thoughts came into his head that the guy was already crazy. In order to calm his excitement, he decided to cook something, so he said ha with to bring him faster. But at that moment, he heard the annoyed exclamations of the young lady. She swore at some kucher because he came to take Ryu to a new trip. Ha! En immediately realized that the carriage of the Chagall clan arrived. He tried to drive kucher and told him not to come back here for at least a month, so that Ryu could finally rest. But the man, as soon as he noticed Mr. Ryu, said he had a message for the boy. He was written by Chagall Chkon, Patriarch Clan Chagall. First, Ryu thanked the letter for representing their family in the West in Sichuan, and secondly, it was reported that the ceremony was almost ready, so the family sent an invitation to the boy. Ryu mentioned that the man really told him something about the preparation of ceremony of the brotherly oath. In order for the young man to be able to get the owners of Chagall, the patriarch gave him a carriage with a personal curl. Ryu hoped that he would finally be able to return to his normal life in Taverna, but he did not know that everything was not so easy. Mrs. Tan persuaded the boy to stay with them for a while to rest after such rich events, but Ryu didn't think he had at this time. He promised Mr. Chkan to arrive in time for the ceremony. The girl was touched on how the chef was not seriously treated, so she turned away from him. Kucher was already ready for departure, so they said they would go immediately as soon as the Ryu gave an instruction. And Mrs. Tan, in the upset feelings, hid at the nearest angle, not to get into the eye of the cook. She couldn't understand whether Chan was so good. Why did Chigal's family in so hurried to arrange a wedding ceremony between her and Ryu? At this time, John sat in her room, trying to restore a portrait of her future husband. However, they have not seen so long ago that the memories of his appearance gradually began to weathered from her memory. Therefore, the girl's drawing turned out to be much more courageous than Ryu really was. Suddenly, the sister of Gain ran into the room to see what her lady was doing. The girl immediately covered her picture, insanely embarrassed by her appearance. It was easier for the lady to explain that she considered erotic painting of Chunad than to admit that she fantasized about her fiancé. And the assistant came to pass the message to the girl from the Taiyan clan, which was about Ryu. The girl immediately grabbed the scroll of the girl with interest. It was said that Mr. Ryu demonstrated the highest culinary skills while staying at the Tan estate. In doing so, he deserved the respect of the King of the Poison, and also saved the feast on his birthday. For his awards, he was awarded the title of Dragon Cook, and he managed to save the patriarch of the Taiyan clan, whose life was in danger. It was interested in the helper most. The guy turns out to be quite useful. The next feat of the bridegroom reminded the girl, and about the discontinuous moment when Ryu made her artificial respiration, although they hoped that he did not do the same trick and with Mr. Tan. Apparently he had other treatments, not so dirty. Even thinking about such a Chong was disgusting and creepy. Meanwhile, Father Zhang consulted with the doctor about the current condition of his daughter. He checked her daily, but the girl was getting worse. They hoped that although the wedding would be calm, though they could not be sure of it, her symptoms are exacerbated every time she experiences strong emotions. But now they slept for some reason. The doctor carefully selected the words when talking about the diagnosis of the heir, but the head asked him to be straight. The father himself guessed that the disease was most likely related to the energy of the North Sea Palace. It was all the same with his wife and mother, but now it was not time to think about it. Chonvon had to come soon. Meanwhile, Ryu finally gathered on the road, leaving the Tan family. He just said goodbye to them, sincerely hoping that they could still meet. The gentleman said that since Ryu saved his life, he became a desirable guest of their family, so they are ready to accept it at any time. The man wished him success on the road and asked to pass on hello to Mr. Chon when he got. Ryu was glad because it happened, so he said goodbye to them with a calm soul. He climbed inside the carriage and she immediately went on the road. The Junin and his father looked carefully after the trolley. This guy changed greatly in their eyes when compared to how they treated him at the beginning. The grandfather was convinced that the fact that Ryu became a dragon of cooking was just a beginning. He was waiting for a great future. Ryu could become influential enough to have at least 3 wives, and both elders knew that during the boy's stay here, he had time to fall in love with his ears, without even knowing it. If only Ryu was ready to accept her as his wife and make not a concubine, but his wife, then the parents' dispute would end exactly in a draw, and he was finally married a worthy young man. Aura, which materialized around the Taiyan family mansion when the carriage drove away, a little tense. He did not know what they were conceived there, but could be glad at least because he got alive from here. Suddenly Ha was mentioned one important thing. She looked out the carriage window and reminded the boy that he didn't even say goodbye to Mrs. Ryu explained that he tried, but she was not her own last few days. He constantly avoided him and did not want to talk to him. He couldn't even say hello to her. In addition, Mr. Jeevan almost died through him when he was prepared by his father's father, so she was probably very upset. So instead of saying goodbye, he left her a culinary gift. He even took one portion of that gift of Ryu on a hike, so he got to show his ha. This dish was like all other Chongvon, simply incomparable. At the same time, the news of the Taiyan clan was news that Ryu had already left. This news has severely affected her heart. She was frantically upset that the guy didn't even go to her to say goodbye. My father called her for lunch, but the girl was not hungry. However, when she was about to leave, the Jivel stopped her, saying that this lunch was prepared specifically for her. Instead of saying goodbye, he made a much larger act. This was able to draw the attention of a gloomy young lady. On the plate was a wonderful species of river corner with rice. Opening the sufferers with the same dish, Gaiyan asked Raya to tell her about him. The guy took up food and explained that it was a fish dish called manlio. That is acne. Ha-en noted that this fish looked like a snake. She would never think that manlio could be so delicious. It is historically known that the eel was not so widespread in this era, and do not compare the poison of acne with the poison of the fugue. It was still poisonous. Therefore, acne is usually kept in the pond near the palace, not in the pantry, along with other products. In this era, people reluctantly ate an eel because of its snake-like appearance. And the mucus and its pulled movements complicated the cooking process. If you do not prepare the eel properly, it was possible to poison ichthyotoxin contained in its blood and mucus. However, the curiosity of the chefs of this era did not know the borders, and later came the necessary knowledge, experience, and skill. This helped them to reveal the rich taste and the incredibly tender texture of acne, not comparable to the meat of any other fish. But Raya prepared it not because of the taste, though his dish, as always, woven for both cheeks. The real reason was difficult to express words. Mr. Jeevan, meanwhile, also tasted a rare fish and once again convinced the skill of a new acquaintance. He confessed that he had never eaten such a delicious fish before. Only the daughter had not yet shared his passionate reviews, and the gentleman noticed her tension. He told her that although he knew Raya less than she, but even it is obvious to him that a chef can tell his food no worse than a bard and writer. The eel lives in the river all his life, and when the time comes, he goes to the sea. Like this eel, his dishes left their hope for their return. The history, told by her father, prompted her to taste the prepared lunch. She was still broken because I left them, but it was delicious. Sometimes there are things that are almost impossible to describe in words. Therefore, Ryu prepared such a symbolic dish. And yet the eel is useful for men's strength, so he combined pleasant with the useful. After a while, Kucher warned the guy that if he suddenly gets tired, but they can do a halt and have a snack. The guy sincerely thanked the servants for it, and also used the moment to ask, "What is the ceremony prepared by Mr. Chon?" Kucher was surprised by such a question. Obviously preparing for the wedding. The chef thoughtfully repeated the answer as if digestion of the information received. But a minute, how did they prepare a wedding ceremony? Ryu could not believe that he would become a member of the Chagall clan. Why did they not warn him in advance? That's even if you think about it seriously. Everything that happened to him was going out, and everything was always connected with this clan Chagall. So that's why all others looked at him. They were aware of the wedding ceremony. Now all the parts of the puzzle that he could not lay down have gone into place. When Mr. Chon suggested that he become a member of their family, he did not mean to become a brother. From the very beginning, he saw the young man with his son-in-law, not otherwise. The cold night came, and Ryu's head was also stirred by restless thoughts. What a fool he was. Why he did not understand before what Mr. Chagall was leading. After he reborn into Ru Chonvan here, in ancient China, he had no special hope for the future. He was frankly unlucky with the rebirth, because he could not think about becoming a master of martial arts. In addition, he returned so far, and therefore all his knowledge was in vain here. He had no options for rich. He decided to become a cook, just because he could nothing but cook in his past life. He did not even hope to become the best cook of the Middle Lands. Everything he had was one little jilenitsa. He would like to have a novel with some ancient Chinese beauty, and then other excesses will not be needed. However, Ryu was in despair now, and Ha was only worse. He was a failure in his past life, and now he was forced to marry not with beauty, but with a girl from whom other children were bullied since childhood. These, as Mr. Chon said, the big lips were born. Suddenly, Ryu decided that he could not afford so senseless Zaporozhia and this life, so he jumped out of the carriage. However, it turned out that they had already arrived in place and had nowhere to run. The crowd of people immediately went to discuss and whisper. Was this young man the same Ryu Chonvan who was announced by Mr. Chon? People noisy and exploded by the enthusiastic exclamations that the dragon of the cooking finally arrived at Mount Fulin. He was late. Now he had no chance of escape from the wedding. The servants welcomed him and led him to a guest house, specially designated for Chonvan. The guy looked back on all sides and asked the servants if the family was always so beautifully decorated in the family. They told him that no. Just everyone in the house was very waiting for this day and prepared for him with a special trepidation. Today, they are from a wedding. All of them are a very important day. Moreover, Ryu is not just a bridegroom, but a savior of the lady's life. Everyone greeted the groom joyfully, glad because they had the honor to get acquainted with him. Hen, meanwhile, finally reunited with her girlfriend, and immediately began to gossip and think about something. It was here for Ryu was all uncomfortable every minute. He felt like a cow that was being slaughtered. It seemed to him that his dream of the beauty of the Middle Lands broke up. But he did not suspect what would happen next, and they came to their destination. At the guest house, his future wife greeted the young man. The guy was even afraid to lift her gaze. In seconds, she had managed to hate Muse, but what he saw shocked him. Young was so beautiful, as if Raya had plunged into a magical dream. For some reason, the problem lips disappeared during the separation, and the girl blossomed directly in her eyes. Yang was no less inspired and pleased with their meeting. She wanted to approach the groom, but she was ahead of her father, who was glad to congratulate her son-in-law. A persistent man suggested that he take him into a guest room, because he is probably very tired of the road. That's where he arrived. An approximate servant noticed that he had only had a ceremony, but he also noted that it was surprisingly cold in the yard, despite the fact that the season was not yet. The night sank to the country, and everyone was already resting in their rooms, enjoying the blissful peace. Ryu said everything. Why did John change so much? Due to the fact that she started to control the nutrition? And perhaps through martial arts, she opened an inner gate, and now, even without medication, she could cope with poisons and diseases. Perhaps cooking in this world had much more power than he thought. Suddenly, the Ha was gone into the room, apparently with some important thing. She did not delay and passed the patriarch's assignment. In the note, Han wrote that he had to discuss something important with his son-in-law, so he asked him to come to the place he marked on the map. Meanwhile, John in her room considered the previously drawn portrait of the groom. Probably she should devote more time to drawing. In fact, Ryu seemed much more courageous than her picture, and if you think, they did not even have time to say hello to him. She decided for herself that tomorrow had to meet and talk to him. Although she would gladly meet him now, but he is probably too tired for it. Meanwhile, Ryu just came to the map to the place indicated there. He was a little afraid to go inside, because he could not even imagine what he wanted to talk to him at such a late hour. But when he still had to open the door, he was surprised that he was not Mr. Cheagle inside. But why? He went exactly the map. Why is Chan here? The girl was surprised by the uninvited guest at least no less. And she also hung his portrait on the wall, as inconvenient. The scared cries of the lady swept the yard, forcing the guards to strain. But they were given a decree from the patriarch, according to which they could not interfere in a meeting of the couple. At least what happened. Meanwhile, a confused John asked the fear in Ryu why he found himself here at such a later time, and just managed to break the portrait of the groom from the wall so that he did not notice. Only Ryu still had time to notice that a picture was hung on the wall, though he did not have time to consider it. With every minute inconvenience, the lady's cheek was increasingly. It was not to notice the rupee. He carefully asked how she felt, but in this way, he was confusing the girl only more. The chef put the back of the palm of the bride's forehead to check if she fell ill. He has not changed and remained as careful as in her fantasies. He is so good to cook precisely because he has such warm hands and a heart he loves. And he was so bold he decided at night, hiding from everyone, to come to her. Well, so it seemed like John. Having put all these facts together in her head, John decided to kiss her fiancé as a sign of gratitude. However, at this point, a strange atmosphere was ripe in the room, and the room temperature fell sharply. Ryu turned sharply and found that a huge icy avalanche was coming directly on them. The guy immediately took the situation under his control and ordered John to hide behind his back so that he could hide her from danger. But he was surprised that the bride was completely abnormal. Her eyes were white, empty. She looked like through him. He tried to reach her, but unsuccessfully. She seemed to be faint. Already the guards could not ignore what happened in the lady's house, despite the patriarch's instructions not to interfere. Suddenly, the Lord of Cheagle himself appeared next to them. He ordered the guards to go from here and stated that he would deal with it. In fact, he had been waiting for such a result for a long time, but did not think that everything would be so bad. If only his wife were here, they would be able to help the daughter and her groom together. And so he did not know what to do now. However, the forces of the patriarch were still enough to break the icy wall, by which he discovered the affected children. The elder took his daughter in his arms and did not leave his son-in-law. He heroically pulled them out of the icy prison. But it was not all. Rue, in a panic, asked the master about what happened to John, and the man told him that this was not the first time, though there was no such serious attack. It turns out this icy avalanche was caused by John itself, and was somehow associated with her illness. Patriarch announced with gravity on the heart that they were forced to postpone the wedding. After a while, they managed to eliminate trouble and get out of the icy home. The employees were put in care of the servants, and Mr. Cheagle invited Ryu to talk to him. He told the young man that his wife was originally from the icy Beihai Palace. Therefore, John had crystal blue eyes. The Ice Palace Beihai is one of the largest sets of martial arts in the Middle Lands. They are located in the north, and their main purpose is to conquer all Marima masters. The Chagall family has long broken all the connections with them. But it happened that some of the symptoms of the descendants of Baikai were in the way. The patriarch had so many questions to them, which, unfortunately, he would no longer succeed. Ryu noticed with anxiety how lonely and sad looked when talking about it. Such severe attacks of Chan began shortly after Raya healed. Every time she feels strong emotions or uses internal energy, her condition deteriorates. The chef felt very embarrassed by the fact that this time the attack was due to the fact that he came to her room. As it turned out, Chikon specifically drew this card because he wanted to check if the John and Ryu could be together. But, as the results of his plan showed, it is better for them to postpone their wedding to another time. After all, if Ryu, not having the skills to unite with his daughter, little could happen. The exhausted Ryu sighed heavily. Chon replied that some options were, but they needed to inform all the guests, otherwise they would be very disappointed with the cancellation of the wedding. So the man sent his son-in-law to rest because he had a difficult day today. Chon said he would now be on the debt to Ryu, and he wished the young man good night. The guy went to his guest house, and the patriarch was left alone with his night thoughts. Although he himself felt quite mixed feelings for this wedding, but Ryu was the first with whom his daughter felt necessary. He is the first to give her a shoulder that she can rely on. Meanwhile, Ryu slowly made his way to the main yard of the clan. And why the body of such a weakness got in this degeneration? All the muscles were very ill. Each cell still has a cold. Thank God he survived. Suddenly, looking into the yard, Raya felt some unusually strong warmth. But where did such a strong fire come from in the yard? Is the fire? The guy almost raised panic, as he noticed a servant who flooded this huge campfire. They explained to the young man that since the ceremony was cancelled, they were given a decree to remove and burn all the jewelry. Only now, seeing in what moods the servants were, the guy thought about how disappointed the guests who were so much waiting for this wedding. The servants themselves considered a lot about the current situation and its causes. But if everything was fine with the lady now, then the problem was not in Ryu. Although they have heard rumors that marriages are usually destroyed by a male problem, and it was visible in Ryu that he was not very good with girls. Did this meant whether Mr. Ryu could not be a real man and therefore decided to cancel the wedding? Ryu was in a hurry to say that the servants were not happy in their judgments, but these gossips still forced him to strain. After all, he never thought about it. He never had a girl for both life. But when their guesses were wrong, the servants did not know what to think about, and Ryu acknowledged that the servants were not so wrong. He could not even say confidently that there were no problems. The next day, Mr. Chagall made an official statement to the subjects and guests. People were shocked because such a long-awaited ceremony was so simply cancelled. However, the elder stated that the ceremony was not cancelled, but simply postponed indefinitely. He promised to send them another invitation, in which he would inform the date when she becomes known. Chon thanked the guests who gathered here and hoped for their kindness and understanding, and in the form of a small compensation, he suggested that they taste the dishes prepared for the ceremony. The side bonus seemed to be tolerant as a free feast, so they were quite calm of the master's statement about the wedding. However, there was one guy among the crowd who was mocking the news. Ryu straightened it. Did this guy get crazy, once ridiculed the large family of Chagall? Hei-En told him that it was a young man from the clan herself, the eldest son of the elder, the Gel herself. A very strong disrespect for the entire clan of Chagall was read according to the swearing smile of the guy and a neglect tone. Guyan was told that as a child this freak often mocked their lady. She, like the whole clan, had a strong hostility for this arrogant young man. It was worth talking to a childhood with Gel or children from other noble families. The Gel immediately began to make fun of it. He never allowed her to play with everyone. He could joke and pull the poor girl for his cheeks, making fun of her appearance. Until the sister was banished with arrogant boys. But such situations were repeated once every time. He has never liked it, despite the good appearance and noble origin. Ryu was surprised to think that these tense relationships between the clans herself and Chagall continued for the first century. This time, Gel clung to Patriarch Chagalia because he tried in every possible way to make a situation with his good speeches, although he had to apologize to them, kneeling. The patience of the Patriarch began to emerge. He asked the guy gloomily, did he forget the story of dead Chagall won the living himself? Ryu, hearing the familiar name, was very pleased that Mr. Chagall knew his favorite part of the history of the Three Kingdoms. During one of the campaigns, Chagall Liang, a great commander of ancient China, became seriously ill and died. Upon learning of this, she herself took advantage of the chance to attack. However, Chagall Liang envisaged it and developed a plan. With the help of a mannequin of a tree, the forces were afraid of the army itself, after which the latter fled. This story conveys the wisdom and insight of Chagall and the timidity itself. But Gel was very neglected by history and believed that this case could only be considered a fairy tale that children are told. The Patriarch warned the boy that since he is no longer a child, he should follow his language. Otherwise, he will understand in his own example why so many talk about this fairy tale. The Patriarch himself looked madly threatening, shrouded in an incredibly strong magical aura. The guy again began to make fun of Chagall, this time considering his threats not frightening, because he could not hurt his guest. The guy saw only one goal, with his humiliation to lower the honor of the Chagall family to the bottom. It is no longer able to restrain himself. The elder Chagall gathered all his magical power and rushed behind himself, which slid into the crowd of people. Ryu got between them and tried to reassure the angry lord. The war between the clans could not be allowed, and too many outsiders were looking at their altercation. Finally, Mr. Chagall was able to exhale a little, but noticing this, the Gel exclaimed from the crowd, which somehow poorly demonstrated Mr. Praise for his clan. Chon immediately swung on the young man, but Ryu had time to stop him from this action. The father-in-law, of course, inherited the power of the clan of the Chagall, but patience, in order not to perceive provocations, he clearly was not enough. Suddenly, the Gel mockingly suggested that the dragon of cooking, no more than a fairy tale and nothing more. After all, at the ceremony, Chagall's family offered not so many exquisite dishes. That's how to believe that one of them is a dragon of cooking. Ryu offended even so many doubts about his own skills, because the Gel did not consider the traditional dishes of the Chagall family something special. One day, Chagall Lian tried to move through a stormy river, which could only be made by sacrificing a person, but instead, he stuffed large balls from the dough with stuffing and let them down the river. And not knowing these details, the Gel dreamed of making fun of the dumplings of the Chagall family. And after that, he also laughed from the fact that Ryu chose not some beauty, but a scary Chagall Chan. The anger of the patriarch was so boiled that he was ready to kill almost a stupid guy who could not hold his tongue. But Ryu stopped his father-in-law, deciding to take control. He suggested Gel to prepare those ordinary dumplings so that they would even surprise him. But if he manages to do it, he will be forced to apologize to Mr. Chkon. The Gel did not take this dispute seriously because he considered dumplings a cheap dish, which is pressed almost all the median lands. However, he agreed to the dispute, considering himself a conscious winner. He did not think that something could work in Ryu, so he set his condition. If Ryu loses, he will have to crawl between Gel's legs and apologize to him. This condition was angered by the patriarch, but Ryu said he agreed to it, and immediately went to the kitchen to start cooking. And the Gel rejoiced in his ego by now that Ryu would be his first victim to the revenge of the Chagall clan. At the same time looking so funny, not ominous, that even guests considered him strange and inadequate. Mr. Chkon apologized to his son-in-law for a little overwhelmed with his emotions, and also brought him into this dispute. But Ryu replied that nothing was wrong. There are just things that a person has to answer, and he promised the test to make sure that he no longer had to listen to these delusions. The man pleased how much his son-in-law was, how he took care of Chon and his family. Having tied his happy bandage on his head, Ryu was ready to start cooking. A few hours have passed. The guests were scattered at the tables and were looking forward to the time when they could finally taste the dish of the dragon of culinary. Chon very much hoped that the cook would be able to help the family wash away from shame through the wedding. So also a pinch from the clan himself sat quite close and spoiled the patriarch nerves. At the same time, constantly exacerbating the situation with their caustic comments and appeals to the guests. He noticed that somehow there was no way with his dumplings. Suddenly, he felt a wonderful smell that came out of the kitchen. The whole crowd returned immediately in this direction. The courtyard came to a Ryu, which looked quite calm and confident, and thanked the guests for the expectations. And immediately he began to give people convicts with dumplings. Instead of preparing his branded lunch only for Gel, he had prepared food at all guests so that everyone could eat. While Ryu was giving out lunch, Mr. Chkon tensed his reaction to the food of Gel himself. He looked quite crazy and looked at the dish on all sides, shouting that, as he looked, he was handed by ordinary dumplings. In his opinion, other guests agreed, who were clearly in no hurry to try them. They immediately felt the frustration and were ready to agree that the title of Dragon of Culinary, only hearing. The patriarch immediately cast a wary look towards Chonvon, but he told him not to worry. Chon mentioned that Ryu was the most admired in the world, and especially Chagall Lan. If there was something related to her, he necessarily sought to find out. With such a love for the creations of Chagall Lan, he could not allow someone to insult his wonderful dumplings. Ryu suggested telling the guests in more detail about the dish they are about to taste. But the Gel interrupted him and said that he does not want to listen, but better throw a dumplings in his mouth and wait for the Ryu to crawl between his legs. His example was followed by other guests, considering that Ryu wanted to explain to such ordinary dumplings, but they were very mistaken. Ryu tried to warn them that they should be carved more carefully, but did not listen. In the same second, the Gel seemed to explode from how hot the dumplings were and began to spit with hot juice from them. He did not expect a hot broth inside the dumplings. The patriarch of the clan was also frightened without realizing what was happening at all. It was Chonvon and tried to explain them. The name of this dish is xiangbao. This dish has been invented recently, during the Qin dynasty in China of the 18th century. To begin with, you need to take gelatin or pork skin with chicken legs and boil them with spices. Then cool, cut, and add the dumplings to the stuffing. Then give the form and send to cook. Under the influence of high temperature, gelatin in dumplings melts, forming hot broth. When eating, you must first bake or cut the dough, drink the broth, and then eat the stuffing. But they did not listen to him and immediately began to eat. So they baked. And now anyone who tasted the dumplings spat with a hot soup, notwithstanding what she is hot. Gel is very angered. Did Chanvan try to surprise him by placing hot broth inside the dumplings? He turned his plate in rage, and Ryu tried to explain that he tried to warn the boy about it. But at the same time, the gel was simply afraid to admit that though it burned, it was delicious, even too much. In the meantime, the guests have already had time to unbutton and were very fond of them, because the broth combined the tartness and saturation of the seasonings, which was not in ordinary dumplings. And on all sides of the yard began to cling enthusiastic exclamations. Everyone was delighted with this lunch. No one has any doubt that the Chegal clan is the best, and the title of Dragon Culinary is true. They continued to burn and spit the broth, but could not stop enjoying its paradise. Even the gel could not restrain itself and continued to absorb one dumplings after the other, wishing more. At the same time, when he apologizes from his ancestors for being the worthless son of the great clan himself, he bows his knees in front of the Chegal clan. From the steam and splashing of the broth, the humidity in the yard rose so much that in the bright sun in the sky even appeared a real rainbow. Meanwhile, John in her room finally came to her senses. And immediately Ha was barking her for the fact that the girl immediately got out of bed. But she convinced the helper that when she got up, everything was fine. She went out to the balcony and looked at the sky with a smile, and soon a little helper joined her. There was such a good rainbow in the sky, she couldn't miss her while lying in bed. Meanwhile, two very dear nobles came to Chanvan, wanting to ask him a question. They wanted to find out what the dish was called. It could not be called ordinary dumplings. The guy went up a little, but replied that it was called xiaolanbao. However, they heard it wrong, and it seemed to them that the name was translated as dragon dumplings. It seemed to them that it made sense, because if you bite the dumplings, then it would pour out a fiery broth, just like a dragon's breathing. However, they were known, but it takes up to 10 months for their preparation, and Chanvan coped with the task so quickly. Ryu was very surprised that even thousands of years ago in Korea and China, many confused sorongpo and sorengpo, and it is probably that he had just started this misunderstanding in world history. After a while, the moment came when the gel had to apologize to Mr. Chkan. He stood and was forced to repent and apologize for his actions, and the patriarch was just mocking him, pretending that he did not apologize from the first time. Therefore, the boy had to apologize again and again, pleasing the self-satisfaction of the patriarch. Not surprisingly, both clans still keep the image on each other. Their dispute was interrupted by John, which suddenly appeared in the yard. The father was in a hurry to entertain the girl with the news that Ryu defended the honor of their family, and was just a wonderful bride. Hearing the familiar voice, the gel looked, anticipating the moment when he could again be mocking over the John. But to a great surprise he saw not a terrible girl. He was always laughing at which a young lady. She was a little awkward, but she congratulated the old enemy. After all, the gel promised to marry the most beautiful girl of the Middle Lands. Was she near him all this time? Noticing his fiancée, John wondered at him whether Rue was surprised last night. She apologized for being too excited before him, and Mr. Chon apologized for interrupting the couple at such an uncomfortable moment. So even Ha was he supported the story, saying that she had heard a lot of noise from the ladies' room. The poor gel could not understand what happened last night and what they were talking about, but it was clear to him that he had lost, and the honor of the family did not defend, and did not find love as a result. From such severe stress, the gel is even faint, which caused real resonance among guests. On the night of the same day, Ryu and Mr. Chigal met on the bridge to calmly discuss all the events alone. Chon confessed that he wanted to ask Raya for another service. He would like the young man to go with John to the capital to find out what was with his daughter. The man sent his son-in-law to the eastern capital of Kifin. It was the capital of the Song dynasty. It is known that 72 famous Pika hotels are located throughout its territory. In addition, it is where the most famous and skilled chefs of the Song dynasty are gathered. There, Chanvan had to find a man named Chegal Hak. It was Uncle John and Schwager Chon. From childhood he was very smart and capable, and now has become a dear official. In addition, he is a master of medicine, and was always very good to John. The patriarch hoped that it could help her. The emperor would go, but given that the eldest son he himself arrived for them for the holiday, and went completely drooping. He had to go into possession and make sure that there was no misunderstanding between them. Chon has already prepared a boat where they can get to the capital, and his servants were already loading it at the time. In fact, he would like Chongvon to remain and become his son-in-law. But he felt that the state of Chong was still restless, so he would have to ask them to go on the road as soon as possible. He sincerely apologized to the plowing burden on Ryu, but he had no one who could help him, so Chon was ready to trust her daughter completely. The guy was frightened by the serious mood of the man, timidly promised that he could trust him, and only after that Mr. Chigal released him, and Ryu used the moment to slip, covering his escape by the fact that he still had to prepare for departure. Chon, with a friendly smile, sent the young man to sleep and gain strength before leaving. But it was only necessary to leave, as suddenly the head was seriously serious. As he thought, he felt a very strange aura in his first meeting with Chonvon. It does not seem that it is the ability of the master of martial arts. Suddenly, he told someone to stop hiding here. From where you do not get, a man jumped out in a long mantle. As it turned out, it was a head of the head, whom Chon instructed to find out about everything that you could about Chonvon. But the past boy was quite incomprehensible. But the spy managed to find out that 10 years ago, the village in which Ryu Chonvon lived was burned after the attack of the heavenly demons. Chon thought that these were everywhere of the attack of different sects, and that there was nothing special about it. But the spy noted that in this case the attack was committed to destroy the Ryu family. On that day, his father was killed, but his mother was mysteriously disappeared, which is doubtful. He would not like to impose his opinion, but the boy seemed to be moving away from Chonvon if he was really associated with the sect. However, Chon was not convinced that he could now make such decisions. The spy immediately perceived it at his own expense, as if he said something extra, but the head assured him that everything was fine. He knew that the speaker was just worried about him, but for John, Ryu was now the closest man. Therefore, like a daughter, the man decided to trust, because he sees in Ryu now, not a foggy past boy. The next day, they had already gone on a long journey by the river. The weather was wonderful, and the sea surface carried their ship forward. In fact, Ryu was even sorry that the ceremony was cancelled. But such a trip from the John was like a honeymoon. He waited for so long. However, the trip was not as calm as Ryu expected, because of a seize disease, which sharply came to him. Zhang tried to cheer him up and give advice on how to cope with nausea, but Chonvon was careful that everything was fine with him. Although it was not very successful, Patriarch Chigal's body, who went on a trip with the couple, was very pleased with the fact that Ryu rolled with such a weak body. But shortly after these mocks, it became bad for him, so the warrior was not laughing. Sea illness was also caught by little twins, so that Chan remained the only one who had no problems with the trip. It was hoped that there would be no problems on the road. In general, they were very lucky that the Tonggageo River, which they sailed, was a state water. But despite the fact that the bandits had to be here in the afternoon, no one was guaranteed full safety. After a while, they noticed that a thick fog was formed around. And by the way, this was decided to use those bandits that travelers so afraid. They sailed to the boat on their rafts and, without spending time, began to throw a rope on the feed and climb up. These were the people who were called Hejio in China, that is, pirates and marine robbers. They specially attacked during the fog so as not to attract the attention of the guard. The couple was very hoped that the talented guard would be protected from the pirates. But because of seize disease, he was not something that could not fight, but even normally think and move normally. And the robbers, in the meantime, brazenly climbed on the ship and ordered them to give everything valuable, which was only on the ship. However, John was not afraid and decided to take the situation in her hands. Although she had not fought with people before, she was from the clan of Chigal and knew many combat technicians. Yang was going to use the Tantigon technique against robbers, with which it is possible to concentrate the internal energy at the tip of the finger and shoot. Ryu tried to stop her because he knew that this technique was too dangerous, and he began to invent another solution to the situation in an emergency. At that moment, he remembered what the guidance was given to him by Mr. Chan before leaving. He noted for Ryu that his main duty in this journey is to keep the Chan calm and not allow her emotions to take a hill. Its internal these were also unstable, so it should be avoided without urgent need. And in case they suddenly want to buy something or just need the money, Mr. Chan generously gave them a whole bag of money. And only then did he send the children on the road. Now, not to face the anger of the pirates, Ryu had to give them this bag of gold. But even so much money was not enough for them. The leader of the pirate gang demanded Chonvon to give him a boat, but he could no longer allow it, otherwise they would not go to the capital. Not having received the desired, the bandit was ready to kill Raya, and in that case he would not even blink an eye. As a warning, The robber jumped on a guy with a dagger and laid his skin with a blade. The guy fell aboard, and on the temple, he had blood drops through the cut. Not wanting to take risks, the cook was ready to give them even this guy boat to save their lives, Yong and the crew. But his bride was not going to put up with that attitude. After the boat lightning, the icy magic enveloped. The pirates realized that John studied the martial arts, but they greatly underestimated it, considering only a weak girl. Ryu begged her to calm down and not spend her internal energy on them, but she did not listen to him. They wounded her loved ones, so she couldn't just take it and get them out of her hands. She got into a stable position and pulled her hand forward, cutting off 2 fingers. Pirates confidently rushed to attack her. Ryu didn't understand what to do. Even if his bride manages to make a thing in technique, she will impress only one of them, and 2 remaining pirates will still attack. But he could not imagine how strong magic the girl had. She threw away all the pirates from the ship with a huge icy stream of energy. The boat was crazy that a nuclear explosion or a bomb explosion occurred very close. And not only those who were on the ship got into the water. Some rafts with robbers were injured, having crashed. The leader was embarrassed and felt animal horror when looking at the girl. She leaned to him and put 2 fingers to his temple, threatening. The man promised to return them all the looted, but it was not necessary for her. She wanted to take revenge on her groom's abusers. Ryu could no longer sit with his hands. Now the John is too excited and also uses these. If he does not stop it, then everything will be just like last time. The girl was already swinging, preparing to strike another control stroke. Chonvon ran to her behind and began to ask her not to kill this man. However, she was ready to kill anyone so that Mr. Ryu would not suffer. At that moment, she looked insanely terribly and was literally not like herself. But he promised the old man to take care of his daughter. The tone of Ryu suddenly became low and serious. He last asked the John to stop it. The girl was on the platoon and demanded not to interfere with the boy in these showdowns. But Ryu said he could not but act, because he should protect his child. And at this moment the girl's heart was immediately frozen. Anger and hatred went to the background. The only important thing was that Ryu called her his child. From this sweet nickname, the crew almost brought the cheekbone. And then it caused a new attack of nausea and rejection. But the main thing is that Zhang liked it, and finally the dispute with the pirates came to an end. The journey continued. Soon they were accustomed to sea disease and were able to enjoy the ship. As for the pirates, though they scared them, but were useful, now they had their own rower on the ship, which became a robber team commander. They could reach the capital even faster than the plan. Zhang calmed down. Well, she had no attack like last time, but there was something that worried the cook. Did the Zhang always have these harmful symptoms? He could not say exactly when he noticed it. But at some point on the dark hair, the ashes began to appear. Ryu was almost sure that it was somehow associated with Bihai. But despite his excitement, they still got. A few more days have passed and nothing remained in the capital. They finally entered the port of the coastal city. They will soon meet with Uncle John, and he will be able to evaluate the condition of the niece. At least Ryu was counting on it. Having loaded bags with things on their shoulders, they continued their journey. It remains to suffer a little. Chonvon hoped that Chan was soon recovering, and then he would be able to fulfill his little dream. He marries the most beautiful girl in China, who was his bride for him. Quite quickly, they got the capital of Kifin with all their friendly company. Many people were expected on the main square of the city. Suddenly, the twins were noticed by someone in the crowd and dragged a couple of doves behind themselves. To a great surprise, Ryu in the crowd, he saw another little helper who looked just like twins. Apparently, she was a servant of Uncle Chan because she said that the old man had a meeting on the square, and she tied with him. Such a meeting did not expect such a meeting. How many such kids are in the family in general? Are they triple? After greeting, the sisters finally paid attention to the elders and greeted the lady. But Ryu was clearly not recognized by the little helper. The guy coiled and introduced himself as Mrs. Cheagle's husband, although they had no wedding, but in fact he was her future husband. However, the assistant missed this information past her ear, and thought that only a new servant of the house Chegal was in front of her. She also called him a rather impractical slave, believing that at home everything was very bad once they take such worthless people. But the sisters confirmed the boy's words and said that he was really a man, Mrs. Chan. The maid again thought that she was just joking. Noticing it was wrong, she was indignant. How could this skinny and ugly man be a man of John? He is so bad that he does not want to use his servant. Trying to take her hands, she exhaled and decided to talk about another. Ryu noted that the issue immediately embarrassed the girl and realized that he would have to come up with some explanation. But the twins ahead of him and answered that the reason was that the pervert, as they called Raya, just a worthless man. And although Chonvon he hated for such words, but still partly they were right. When Ryu lost his faith in himself almost completely, John suddenly spoke. She told the servants that in general, Mr. Ryu has a lot of good features that they do not know about. First, he prepared very well. Let him look a little strange but very courageous, and even once saved the life of Mr. Chagall. And he has an incredibly warm, good heart. It is not in vain that women can both kill and save a man in a word. In his own words, Yang gave the young man unprecedented confidence. He boasts very comical and suggested that the girls continue their journey. While his behavior caused some inconvenience and even shame, John continued to look at him with a loving look. They soon got the residences of Chagall. However, Uncle John still had a guest's reception, so the helper asked Jong and Ryu wait a little. Uncle was a capital official, so it is not surprising that he is often busy. But they did not manage to wait for their turn, because suddenly a loud cry was heard behind their backs. Some gentleman Sisha swore with Uncle Chong for a little thing because of some little thing, and he tried to reassure him and offer to go for lunch. The name of this master seemed to be a surprisingly acquaintance. Suddenly, he understood where Mr. Sai heard about it. Sisha, also known as Su Dongpo, the greatest poet and statesman of the Song dynasty. Initially, he came to Mr. Chagall because he wanted to treat him with something delicious. And after the result, he scored his head only with politics. Shai was also one of the 4 famous gourmets of China, a large cook, the creator of many Chinese dishes. Disappointed in the fact that his uncle turned dinner into a business meeting, the man sought to get out of the mansion, not wanting to hear anything else. John, who saw him for the first time, unlike RJ, was amazed by such sharp behavior. And Chonvan was known that this man was included in history as the first opponent of the United Korean state. Sun Dynasty 10th century. At this time, the Song dynasty was not so strong that the Middle Lands should consider it. For the Sun, the situation remained unstable. It regularly was defeated by Western and Northern Leo. At the same time, Korra won the Kadan. For the Sun Kor dynasty, they became a good combat ally. However, Kor took advantage of their position and achieved a favorable financial agreement with the dynasties Lao and Song, which blew up and so shaky situation of the Song. And although the situation did not like the top of the Song, they could not break the relationship with Kor, because the latter provided great support in the war with the kidney. Su Dongpo Yaro criticized the actions of Kori and insisted on the rupture of diplomatic relations. But the top of the government responded sharply to his evidence, because she feared that without the support of Kor, Sun would not have a chance. Even as he was angry with the bark now, Ryu realized that he was not considered the main haters of Korea. He accused Chagall of forgetting his situation and decided that he was allowed to rush between Sun and Liao in the pursuit of money. But as if Chagall Hak, Uncle Chong, did not try to convince the man that he did not understand, he did not work. Suddenly, he finally noticed in the court of John and her groom, who arrived, and apologized for witnessing this scene. Tired of talking with Hook, Sui announced that he intended to leave the residence. In order not to let him do it, his uncle was forced to ask Raya for grace. Hak wanted to imagine Mr. Su Dongpo. He shared that the bridegroom of his niece was a famous dragon of cooking, and only this could finally be interested in the man. She never heard of him, but was intrigued. Uncle was stuck to gourmet by the fact that there was no name for such a famous cook, and suggested telling him about him. He introduced the man as the only husband of the daughter of Patriarch Chagall, and the owner of the largest tavern in the Middle Lands. Allegedly, before the title of the dragon was known in all the Middle Lands. And during the demonstration of his dishes, the Tan's estate suddenly appeared. But biting a piece of dishes of the Aru, the snake leaned before him and wept. And after that, the dragon hurried to hide in the sky, recognizing the rule of Mr. Ryu. So he received the title of Dragon Culinary. Despite the fact that half of the story was an obvious lies, it impressed. Then his uncle also told a fable about how Ryu allegedly returned to the life of Patriarch Clantan 3 days after his fantastic dish. So then he said that the dumplings of Ryu seemed to be a rainbow of 5 flowers, and much more that partially had a similarity to reality, but was very decorated. And finally, Hawk promised that right now Ryu would show them his incredible culinary skills. It was only through this fantastic story that the uncle still was able to persuade Si Shi to stay in his residence. He really wanted to evaluate the skill of the cook. Currently, Si Shi went to rest, but promised that he would come to them for dinner tomorrow. The most difficult stage, according to Uncle, interest, was left behind. Now Ryu had to wake up his dragon and cook a gourmet wonderful dinner. On the evening of that day, Ryu and Hawk sat together on the shore of his bell, discussing the events of the day. The uncle was a little awkward that he loaded Ryu with responsibility from the arrival, but he was very grateful to the boy for his help. And Ryu is only pleased to be useful. But Chonvan was curious why Uncle so desperately tried to convince Mr. Su Dongpo in his judgments. First, he was just forced to do it because he just returned to caffeine after many lowering and could not bring his superiors now. If it does not come to agree with the SS, you will have to go to court, and then it will be reduced again. And to explain such a reason, the uncle asked if PJSC participated in the war. He replied that no. Hawk told him that for a long time, more than 20 years ago, there was a great battle of Chagall and Beihai. He still cannot forget that he could not do anything then. Unlike Ryu, he was still quite young. He had neither knowledge in martial arts nor talent. He hid days and nights continuously from all. And then he realized that he could read about heroic actions and incredible ingenuity of famous warriors only in books. After that, he decided to become an official and do whatever there is no wars in their country. And as a result, he and one person could not persuade. But the relationship with Korra is very important. Otherwise, they will not be able to withstand Lao. He just wanted the Shy faction to realize it to prevent a possible war. This horrible story touched Ryu to the heart. He promised a Hook that he would reveal the true willpower and make Mr. Su Dunpo. Therefore, full of strength and inspiration, went to the kitchen. Mr. Hak could not help but rejoice that such a responsible and responsive person appeared in their family. The next day, Eshai, as promised, came to the meal to the Chagall family, and Ryu was ready to serve the guest with his new dish. The gourmet literally burned it from the anticipation of this promised beautiful year. However, when he saw the dish, he was confused for a moment, not understanding what was happening. Did the dragon of cooking give him not some fantastic dish, but only ordinary pork? But only a few moments passed, and looking closely, the indignation of the man began to retreat slowly. Yes, it was a common pork that the poor were eating, but the wonderful shine of fat and the incredible softness of the meat that you can see by just looking, it was very pleased. So is this attractive, fragrant aroma? Shi could no longer restrain himself that he had saliva from his mouth. How gentle was it meat, and its surface seems to dance. Ryu prepared the man of Dunpo Ro, a dish that Su Dunpo had to create in the future. But the guy did not just like to copy the original recipe. Moreover, given that Shi has not even created it. Therefore, he created a dish based on his history, skills, his vision of the dish of the legendary gourmet. And on the grip he had unchanged helpers. The main ingredient of Dunpo Ro is pork. A fresh pork brisket is needed, from which the skin has not yet been removed. For a long time a torch was used to clean the skin. However, there is no need now. Alcohol with high alcohol is enough. To do this, he needed a biker in the process of use, which came out a real fire show. Maximum care is required to burn all the hair on the skin of pork, but not damage the skin itself. And then the most important step in the preparation of Dunpo Ro in the style of Ryu Chonvon. Before extinguishing the flame of the knife, you need to cut off extra pieces of meat and give it a square shape. It is very important to do everything carefully and quickly, so that the meat does not have time to start cooking. The original method of cooking this dish makes us to fry in a large amount of oil. Then the meat is tied with a rope to maintain its shape. But Ryu only fry the cuts so that the meat seizes and a peculiar crust. Thus, the meat is not fried, remains soft and juicy, does not lose its shape. The further preparation process is little different from the original recipe. Tires long extinguishing and cooking meat to give it tenderness. In the course of such preparation, the meat acquires almost gelatin structure. And from the cheapest ingredient of all the median lands, you can get a dish that will cause any gourmet. In general, the cooking took the whole night, but this is absolutely not important, because the story that Ryu has invested in his work is much more important than a time. The meat turned out so tender that it could be covered with a spoon. Uncle still did not understand why Ryu handed him a guest such a cheap dish, but the gourmet was much more important for the cooking method than the ingredient. Did he ask? Is the imaginary difference between noble and poor people grow from rotten arrogance? Ryu acknowledged that Suchi was right. People sometimes are blind and only see what they are tuned to. And then the uncle realized that this dish was not a reason to tell the story. It was this story. The man was finally able to taste the long-awaited treat. She felt this taste literally flowing through it, and the endless aromas of meat slowly dissolved in his mouth. Not even chewing, he felt the tenderness and saturation of his creation. It can be said that in one bite all the feelings and tastes he had once felt were intertwined. It was delicious, and the gourmet was not ashamed to admit it. Then he asked Ryu as this dish called. The guy replied that Dunbo Rao. The original name was Dunpo Ro, in honor of the creator himself, but the chef specifically changed him so as not to violate the course of history. It was a name that expressed only a clear respect for the legendary figure of Chinese cuisine and the kitchen itself. But Ryu easily said that allegedly all the depth of the name was deciphered as a wave moving east. He was pleased that the gentleman did not give up his dish only because he was cooked from pork. She was able to open his good heart in the East, just as he opened it for pork today. He felt as an incredible extravaganza of taste. He carried it, as if on the East of the East. He felt quite satisfied and invincible. Not surprisingly, Ryu was called the Cooking Dragon. Sishu allowed himself to give up the will of the opportunity and see where the waves of life, which he advised to succumb to Ryu. However, perhaps the man was even in too strong ecstasy from the dishes eaten. Subsequently, Ryu and Hook had already begun to worry about the guest's condition. However, everything went properly. In the course of his meal, Mr. Su understood why Ryu called the dish Eastern Waves. He tried to make him think about the Kori dynasty, which was just in the east. Su believed that in the decades of fighting this trifle with Liao, these arrogant, stupid people from the nobility became true ghouls. But the Hook intervened in the reflection of the man and asked him, did not all have a bit of stubbornness? Sometimes the Hook itself is stubborn and passes by the ears what they say. But despite the fact that he has chosen the official of the official and regularly communicates with people, as he is, Mr. Su initially offended the fact that the man tried to compare them with these selfishists with Kor. But then the Hook recalled that Su was saying that all the problems in the arrogance, but now revealed it. In the meantime, while they were talking, still in some hypnotic trance from the dish, Ryu tried to understand why his pork had such an effect. However, during a conversation, the Su was able to understand that he may have been too angry. And not Korea, but the state and the Song family now was the cause of his negative judgments. They, as a fire, were afraid of Liao, but because of their principles, they were ready to put peace and to pay tribute. Let them be quite small and not so influential. But Su is convinced that with the help of Kor, the Song dynasty will be able to overcome Lao sooner or later. Now the gentleman was ashamed of all the bad words spoken to the dynasty that helped them in the fight. He did not notice how he was blinded by his arrogance. After lunch, the guest sincerely thanked the cook for a stunning dinner and recognized his workshop with culinary skills. And he felt perfectly the story that the chef wanted to tell his dish. No wonder they say that the dish will say several times more than an inept speaker. Ryu was glad to hear praise from such an important person, so he thanked him and bowed. But unfortunately, Mr. Su time was already back to their estates. Has a lot of things in the city. Before leaving, the chef gave the guest something very important. It was a recipe for his dish, neatly recorded in scrolls. Ryu wanted to thank him in this way, because he valued his skills and was able to see and understand what was hidden behind the shell of this dish. Shai was incredibly pleased with such an expensive gift, so much so that he doubted whether he was worth taking him. In part, Ryu also did it to make it easier to reproduce your famous recipe again in the future. The man gladly accepted the gift and finally said goodbye to Chigal's family. So long ago he did not see him so happy, although the dish was really delicious. But Ryu realized that such a joyful official was not only because of lunch. In the Middle Lands, there are not many available and cheap ingredients as pork. Sisha was a prominent literary figure of his time, but at the same time everyone noted his rigid character and stubbornness. After all, he was sent to the province more than once, where he was not honored at the top. So until his death, he served in the distant corners of China. Sisha spread pork recipes among the poor, so that they could touch the beautiful side of cooking. As he lives, he regularly prepared something for the peasants, was open with them, and shared his life without prejudice. Therefore, he was later loved and mentioned as one of the greatest figures of the Song dynasty, a man in the state from the people and the creator of the legendary Dongpo row. There was a quiet night. Finally, having dealt with all his business, his uncle was ready to look at her niece. Therefore John and Chanvon came to the Hook office together. Ryu helped him very much, so now the turn of his uncle to pay them out. It took a long time, so the man was just refreshing his memory with scrolls about medicine. Chan village opposite lady, and he asked him to reach out. Chanvon was in the seventh heaven of happiness, because it seemed to him that Chong was not so neglected by the disease, and therefore Mr. Chigal quickly cures her. Ryu thought that the uncle was going to simply check the pulse in the niece, but from their faces it was clear that it was not. They were too tense, and the start of the check required them special psychological training. Ryu thought there would be something like a slight examination and recommendations for taking medicinal herbs and more, but everything was much more complicated. Gaku activated his internal energy to thoroughly study the disease of the niece. He last tested it as long as 10 years ago, and apparently, much changed. He was going to penetrate his energy flow directly into the channels and to check the internal state of yin-yang. All this looked so scary and dangerous that the ants ran through the skin. He was going to cure her, and not kill? This procedure required a great concentration of both family members. They had to almost merge their energy together. And in a few minutes, the uncle came out of consciousness to get into her channels. Although Ryu was embarrassed that, despite the fact that the hook was not engaged in martial arts, he knew so much about Chi's energy. The hook patiently was engaged in his examination, and sedatively whispering the niece that she had to endure it all a little. Although it was quite painful and exhausting for her. When his uncle had penetrated this John, it looked like it appeared in a huge, dark and empty room that illuminated the light of one stunning large butterfly. It was a beautiful and powerful energy of John. And the last uncle saw her a very small caterpillar. He asked the butterfly conductor to send him to the right way, and she led him deep until her uncle came across a huge fiery energy that was gathering inside the girl. Apparently, it was the disease that worried her. But probably thanks to Chonvan, this problem is not as scary as it seemed at first. Probably so none of the doctors could help, due to the strange effect of Ryu Chonvan, as if he brought it from another world, and inside there was a strong coolness. Probably about this was spoken by Brother Haka, Mr. Chon. Inside the John, the blood of the icy palace Beihai flowed, comparable to the mighty wolf. This is probably what the girl got from her mother at birth. Surprisingly, his uncle did not feel her presence. However, at the same time, the man noticed how the February wolf tore Venus a flycatcher, which was the embodiment of the energy of fire. Then the uncle realized that apparently fiery energy was just suppressed baby Beihai, and now the energy of cold has begun to show itself. This was amazed at the ability of John, but she could not use it. Already finishing the review, Hawk told a couple of lovers that Zhang seemed to be infinitely fighting with another version of himself, and the second energy was activated because Ryu then helped her. Chonvan sincerely hoped that there was a way to cure Chon from this scourge. Although the hook could not blame the Raya for trying to save the job, it was impossible to cure it. Now only two options have opened before Raya. Either giving up everything and living your life, or fulfilling your dream, marrying from John. But it could be a threat to them, and as a result of icy energy will defeat her body. There was a full mess in the head of the John. The conversations of Uncle and the groom in her head went into some background noise. She was too busy with her experiences. Finally, notwithstanding bad news, John got up and said she would better go to her room. She was very tired. So she said goodbye to her uncle and left. Chonvan wanted to ask the bride, but Hawk asked him to stay for a minute. He asked Ryu if he knew something about the mother of the John. Therefore, it was only known what Mr. Chon told him, that the mother of Zhang was originally from Beihai. But he did not know that this disease was the lightest part of the fate of John. The hook told the young man that John was the same single flower that blossomed during the war between the Chegal clan and the Beihai palace. Chon parents met during the war. In spite of how difficult the time was, Mr. Chon was not frightened and fought for his love. The pain that the whole life is related to the disease has been a trifle, the little thing compared to the pain that the girl feels due to the loss of her loved ones with Beihai. The hook thought that that is why she was so holding on to Ryu. At this point, Ryu realized what a fool was when he thought about marriage without even learning all these details about his bride. He jumped out and began to look for her to talk, and soon he finally was able to find her. He was so selfish, always thinking about her beauty, not interested in what lies in the soul of the girl. But it's time to fix it. He ran to the bride and began to apologize for his behavior. But the girl told him not to approach, and the guy immediately frozen on the spot. Not surprisingly, she is so angry. Because of his selfishness, he may not be able to earn forgiveness even for 2 lives. Suddenly, the air temperature dropped quickly. Ryu was alarmed. He tried to reassure Chon and persuade her to calmly discuss everything. But she was therefore restrained from the last forces. The whole situation affected it terribly. She was not offended by Ryu. She simply did not want to injure him with her strength just like last time. She cried through him, and it broke the last part of conscience and self-control inside the RU. The girl blamed herself only for everything that happened. If it were normal, then Ryu would not have to suffer so much. These thoughts were simply killed by Chonvan. Even now, the bride was worried about him. Compared to her, was just worthless. Suddenly, Chonvan translated the topic and suggested that the girl go to the night fair now. The girl suddenly turned and looked at the bridegroom in surprise. She looked so stunned that Ryu seemed that she would refuse him now. But the girl was very glad and agreed to this proposal. He finally was able to reassure her and distract from bad thoughts. That is why they went to the Kifin Night Fair. Together with the flourishing of the economy and production, he blossomed and nightlife. The fair was filled with people, entertainment, food. They were open all night even in snow or rain. Ryu and John slowly made their way, wondering how many people were around. They were both for the first time in their lives on a date, so they did not quite understand how to behave and what to do. It seemed to Ryu that if John knew that he had never had a relationship for both lives, he would probably not agree to go with him for anything. And she has a bad mood. It was even more frightened by the young man. And as soon as he was about to marry, even if he knows nothing about a date, but Ryu was so worried. After all, John was also for the first time on a date with a boy. So she was glad that it had happened to the person she liked it. If it weren't for Chonvon, she could only dream of looking at a beautiful city with a loved one. At some point, John dared and wanted to take Ryu by her hand, but he suddenly leaned to the side, noticing something interesting on the counter, and the failed attempt to take up her hands terribly embarrassed the poor girl. On the counter of Chonvon was interested in a dish called Tanghulu. He was surprised that it was already at this time. Tanghulu is named after sweets that appeared in the Song dynasty. Chon was also interested in an interesting snack. It was an icy throat candy. According to the girl's reaction, Ryu noticed that she turned out to be very hungry. Then he had one idea. Although it is believed that the main ingredient of Tangle should be hawthorn, everyone knows that something else is better. He quickly ran to the cellar and asked to borrow some kitchen appliances. And he began to create, improving the dish in his own way. The result was an icy tank from the Dragon of Cooking. Especially for Chon made a tank from strawberries, and even such a simple snack could not but capture the girl. Chonvon knew that it was a win-win option, because Tangle from strawberries a favorite dessert of girls at any time. Chon tried a piece, and the fantastic structure of the snack fell very much to her. So sweet and tender. Yang would never think that strawberries could be so delicious. This situation has cheered her mood very much. So John pulled Raya behind her, then walking around the fair. There was so much interesting here. Chonvon was a little puzzled on how much her mood changed in just an hour, but he was pleased that Chong was smiling now. She happily worn from the box to the box, talking to people and buying all sorts of sweets. And then they came across a strange cluster of people, so they decided to approach closer and also see what is there. As it turned out, one merchant sold fireworks there. Ryu never saw the girl so interested and joyful. To think so, Yang is still so young, but has already experienced so much difficulty. She suffered all the time, hid her real eye. Looking at fireworks, Ryu decided that now he would not rush with the wedding. He wants to learn as much as possible about childhood, youth, interests of John. But even what she thinks. Although she is probably hungry right now, so time was dinner. After all, she only had a snack. Then Ryu mentioned that while they came here, they passed one interesting place. He took her there. Chan has never been in a city where so many different taverns were so interested in and surprised. In fact, Ryu was never in such cities, but not to seem boring, he said that it is often. Technically, in his past life, he worked at a Chinese restaurant at the hotel. So it was not such a lie. But when Ryu led the girl to the establishment that he was talking about, John tensed because she did not expect to see. Ryu wrote off this strange reaction of the girl to the fact that she was just afraid that too high prices would be in the tavern. So he hurried to reassure her, said that he had put up a little, just in such a case. But it was not at embarrassed. Suddenly a man jumped out of the institution, all red and satisfied, and he greatly praised women's staff for a good time. Even this behavior of the guest did not embarrass the young man. On the contrary, he thought that when he was delighted, the place was really good. John, who already understood what this institution was doing, was cloudy than the cloud. Suddenly, cute, attractive girls who spent the guests appeared on the threshold. And only then did Chonvon realize that something was wrong here. His attention was attracted by strange lanterns. So it was not just a tavern. The girls immediately surrounded him, inviting him inside. And then Ryu realized that it was not a tavern, but a brothel. The frightened Chonvon immediately bounced back and tried to justify the Chon, that it was not what she thought about. But the girl is no longer reassured. After all, Ryu recently lied quite carelessly, which is often in such places, not knowing where it is leading. Such arrogance has completely taken out of John. She never thought that her fiancé was such a pervert, and on the emotions of her huge witch, she almost spread the whole brothel there. After a while, the walk came to an end, and finally they returned to the mansion of Shegal. Ryu was able to get over to the John, recognizing his mistake, but after this incident he hurt the whole business. Well, though they managed to settle everything, I had to give all the money to compensate for the damages caused by the brothel. On the other hand, he is not the first time to be left without money. However, Ryu was most interested in why John's hair became even more silver. Well, why he got into such a senseless body, which, by his lack of knowledge, constantly stipulated him in uncomfortable and dangerous situations. Why couldn't his body detect a little logic and observation? This is a complete failure. Suddenly, Aha was entered into the room. Chonvon suggested that she was always hungry and wanted him to prepare something. This idea was very interested in the assistant, but it did not come. Chagal Hak said he wanted to see Ryu right now in his office. Chonvon immediately went to him. Uncle said he called him because he thought that Raya would want to check his health. In fact, he was going to conduct a medical examination at the request of Chon, but the guy is not necessary to know about it. Therefore, the Hook explained his desire for rumors to go through the family that there was a problem with the male part in Ryu. Although Ryu did not check whether he had such problems, he was convinced that everything was fine with him. But if the Hook was about to do the same as with Zhang, he can find some power in Ryu. Therefore, the chef still agreed to the inspection. As in the case of John, they sat in front of one and Uncle took the boy for his wrist. Through the window of her room, Yang noticed a strange light and realized that the uncle was going to do with Chonvon. But he did not know that Chonvon had no ability at all, and that this test was just dangerous for him. However, it was too late. The process is running. There was quite empty inside Chonvon's energy. But would the brother ask him to check the bridegroom's daughter just like that? Suddenly the floor shaking, and before the Hook suddenly grew a huge stone wall. He has never seen anything like this before. Noticing inside a person, the Hook wanted to ask her something and ask him to accompany him. It is strange that this person was not like Chonvon. Although not always your idea of a person is the same as what really is. The woman to whom the Hook addressed did not come into contact. She said that he did not get where he needed, and so that he does not look, he will not find it here. It has become another weirdness. Usually everything happens differently. She refused to show her husband unknown to her, and suddenly a huge bird with the head of the lion suddenly appeared. It was scared of the Hook, because this monster could attack him any second. And in the meantime, the woman became quite harsh and rudely ordered her husband to get out of here. And then she really lowered his hand monster. After all, it could be a symbol of the magic of fire, and a symbol of the demonic sect. Suddenly, the Hook realized that he could not even protect against this beast. His abilities were not enough to go on, too strong. But it was not a few seconds as he suddenly moved to a lively avenue full of cars that stood in a long traffic jam. So he did not understand where he was and what was happening. And he was in the true projection of the present. It was pushed by people like holograms without paying attention to him. Who are people? He did not have time to understand what was happening, as he was again transferred to another location. This time, he was underwater. And he was lucky that before he felt a lack of oxygen, he was thrown back into the real world. It happened thanks to a John, which came in time and pulled men from each other. Suddenly her face faded quickly and she called her uncle to herself. He assured her that everything was fine with Ryu, and he lied, as if he had only measured the boy's pulse. But a panic drew attention to the fact that Ryu did not breathe. In a shutdown, the guy, as always, was forced to live that terrible day of fire again and again. Many warriors dreamed of the village and searched for a bloody witch in the salt. The one whose account is so much spilled that not every murderer of medium lands can be compared to her. Her opponents became aware that she decided to associate her life with an ordinary person, and hide from the heavenly demon in this death. After all, if it were not for a stupid love, then neither her husband nor God forgotten the village would not hurt. And all this was expressed by the leader of the detachment of warriors. He called a woman a rat who arrogantly hid from them and instilled this opinion of Chonvon. He convinced the boy that his mother was to blame for all deaths and the collapse of the village, because she was the witch that they hunted. She betrayed their sect and now had to pay. The mother of Ryu was a witch of blood, a member of the cult of demons, and it is strange that Ryu didn't know about it. The parents never told him, and this warrior suddenly opened his eyes to the truth. And even if there were some memories in Ryu that her mother is able to spell, she immediately fled them out of his memory. Suddenly, the Gani brought news that the bloody witch appeared to the village. Obviously, she could not but appear, learning that her family is in danger. Tears rolled through the cheeks when she saw the horror of such an expensive village. Her husband was no longer, and her son was terribly intimidated and broken. Then the leader of the cult ordered his warriors to attack the woman and kill her. The witch asked her son to close her eyes so he would not see what would happen next. She immediately put a spell on the opponents that they were not able to attack her, and could not even move. Although the woman tried to shield her baby, the vicious captain looked up the boy to open his eyes. She argued with her husband, said Chonvona that it was just a bad dream, but the boy did not close his eyes, and what he saw struck him. Now he knew who he really was, his mother, and why she was called a witch of a bloody flower. The woman passed between rows of frozen warriors and one by one deprived their lives. Chonvon finally remembered everyone. After that battle, the mother tried to deprive him of these memories, but now, at a conscious age, they returned to him. At this time, John was desperate to pump the unconscious Chonvon. It was even the likelihood that the guy would not come to mind and die. But thanks to the efforts of the job, Ryu was able to open his eyes and come to his senses. The next day, the cook felt very lousy because of what happened. It is even strange that by this point he had no health problems, given that he had reborn into such a weak body. Still, Chonvon's life was wrapped, despite the fact that he was an ordinary guy, and it did not even completely restore the memories of this body. It is not difficult to guess that childhood was very difficult. Although it was strange that having learned about all these memories, the guy felt such a strong sadness that it was his memories and emotions, not the past owner of this body. Suddenly, while Ryu was thinking about all this, whispering his reflection under his nose, a hook chagall came behind. He sat down next to the Ryu, which was resting on the shore of a small family lake. The hook apologized to the young man for giving him such danger. He could not think that he had no ability. He usually saw that outside the guy did not look like a master, but the fact that he did not expect a hook inside. However, the hook said that while checking it, he came across something very strange. So much so that his uncle did not even know how to explain it all. He asked Ryu if he was associated with a demonic cult. Ryu seemed that he was saying what Mr. Hak was saying, but his memories were so abducted and blurred that he did not even know what to answer. The hook noted that the issue was exciting the guy, so he was in a hurry to reassure him, and said he did not want to question Ryu. But he would very much like the guy to tell the truth, because now his life was connected with the family Chagall and his niece. At that time, Chonvon honestly admitted that he had no secrets, but he really remembers almost nothing about his past. Then the hook remembered the wall that he saw in the Chertogi Chonvon's mind. The feeling was such that something incomprehensible prevents Raya from remembering. Ryu also told that one accident once happened to him. Then he almost drowned. After that time, his life was split into and after, and all the memories were cloudy. Chonvon opened his uncle's soul, and from his balcony Chong also carefully heard these revelations. Many happened to Ryu after he met the Chagall family, and he was not ashamed to admit that everything that happened to him during this time, people, emotions, memories, all this seemed more expensive to him than the vague past. Suddenly he remembered something more, and how could he forget about it? During the inspection, Ryu's hook was very interested in one point. He wanted to find out if he was okay with the man's health. The hook remembered that he wanted to talk about it with Ryu. In fact, everything was not as good as you would like. With male power, everything was so neglected in Ryu that it seemed to be at all. The hook skills were not enough to change something. Ryu has already lost hope of his body, but still asked his uncle if there was a chance to fix everything. The hook replied that there was one option, and Ryu immediately started listening to him. Mr. Chagall told him about the famous King of Medicine, so famous that even Ryu heard a lot about him. This King of Medicine was one of the 8 kings of Murima. In the vast and wild world, Murima title of the king gets to the one who has reached the pinnacle of skill in his art. Murima had kings of poison, chi, blade, tau, fist, spears, cultivation, and medicine. The last king was the only one of the 8 whose knowledge in medicine is so great that he can resurrect and kill anyone at will. And as it turned out, Hook studied him when he was very young. Once they talked about the King of Medicine himself, then Ryu could definitely count on help. The king had to save his personal life. However, there was one small problem. Recently, Hook tried to find where his mentor lives, and it turned out that he was now at the Nanman Beast Palace. This is the place where the famous Chagall Liang was suppressed after Liu Bei's death, and also the name of the future province of Yunnan and the southern part of China. There were all kinds of dangerous diseases, poisonous plants, and insects, as well as terrible predatory beasts and enemy tribes. It is even more dangerous than Junujuan. However, Ryu is ready to risk everyone to become a real man. Before sending the children to the road, Hook gave Chonvon one scroll. It was a letter asking for a full medical examination. He was needed to solve the problem of Ryu and cope with the symptoms of NNO. Ryu surprised it, because recently the uncle said that what was happening from the John was not a disease. But, whatever it is, Chonvon and Chong soon the wedding, which means that they both will not hurt to visit the King of Medicine. The path to Nanman is long and heavy, and Ryu would not like to put her bride in danger in such long journeys. Therefore, he told his uncle that he was forced to give up. With his problem, he could understand somehow himself, with the help of training. But he does not want to risk the health of John. But where you do not get from a Chan and took away the scroll from the uncle. Instead of Raya, the girl decided that they would definitely go on the road and have a hello to the Queen of Medicine. Ryu tried to explain everything and discuss with her, but John said that she would decide what to do, so the next day she ordered to go on the road. She was ready to do her best to finally marry her, and joined her family. Not only Ryu sought it, driven by his selfishness, but also his bride. As the John ordered, the next day the cart was already prepared for departure. Ryu, along with his assistants, quickly loaded all their things and supplies on her. The hook that came out to carry them was even a little sorry that they were coming from him so quickly. They could stay for a few days, relax, but John believed that it was better not to postpone this trip, and she promised to send his invitation to the wedding when everything was decided. The hook apologized to the fact that he could not help the children. His knowledge in medicine was not enough to help in their situation. Ryu, on the contrary, said, "Uncle, thank you for the help. Now they are in debt." Mr. Chagal, laughing, replied that it would be better for Raya to save his gratitude for the king of medicine. He was convinced that he would find a way to help. However, the fact that the king of medicine lived in the palace of beasts was a little alerted by Mr. Chagal. The uncle asked the niece to keep himself and that he did not happen. Always go forward with his head raised. Yang said that the uncle may not worry. She heard perfectly about the dangers of the palace. In addition, she went there not one, but with her constant company. She was ready to go to the edge of the world with her beloved Ryu. Uncle pretended that this explanation reassured him, but in fact, the past Ryu worried him even more. Perhaps the past Ryu will be even more important in this trip than John's disease, although it may not be so dangerous. After talking to a fear, John approached the cart and said she was ready to go. Hei-en has confirmed that they are also ready to go on the road. Then the whole company jumped into the cart, and Ryu was at the head to carry it. The hook of the Chagal, such a distribution of forces, seemed somewhat strange. But if no one presented anything to each other, then it is probably more convenient for them. The children were slowly moving away, and the hook escaped them with a careful look, hoping that this journey would benefit them. If Chonvon is somehow related to the martial arts, then you need to find out at any cost. In order not to violate the 10-year rest of Zhonggujuan, I would not like to survive another bloody war. That evening, somewhere on top of one mountain, gelled desperately on the rock, known for its secret purpose. He was looking for some warrior who lived in this depth. They could also meet elsewhere, but for some reason it was called here. Gel had some doubts about how truthful information was given, because he could easily come across only a bunch of bandits. It is clear that such an important and mysterious personality will not live in the city, but suddenly it was simply deceived. Despite the fear of Gel, he came to where he needed. On the mountain he was greeted by some strange people wrapped from head to feet. The Gel was a little nervously introduced to them as the most beautiful man in Zhongguani. In combination, the eldest son of the family herself. Then they realized that he was the guy that the boss spoke of. They picked him up and pulled him to their leader. They took it deep into the rocks, where a small but majestic settlement was located. They brought him straight to the feet of his master, and the Gel did not know that there was such a shelter in the mountains. The growing man looked at the Gel from the shadow and noticed that apparently the family himself is quite bad when the heir came to him. The Gel was a little afraid of the master, but he still started a dialogue with him. He said he had information about a man sought by a man for many years. This man was the elder of the heavenly demon, the right hand of the heavenly demon himself. The same who burned his native village of Ryu and killed his father in the pursuit of a bloody witch. Gel told him that he knew a 20-year-old guy by the name of PJ, with a red bandage on his head and a very mysterious past. But that was not all. Ryu has a strange art of temptation and a culinary talent that can fascinate anyone. The heir himself told the elder that this guy is the son of a bloody witch. This information was undoubtedly useful to the head of the cult, but in the place of Gel, it would not give it just like that. So immediately asked what the guy wanted in return. The elder suggested that the Gel would ask for money or the title in the heavenly demon sect, but he did not guess. All the Gel wanted to make the bride of her bride. This revelation laughed by a man. The elder suggested that Gel eat together and discuss all the details when they met, and the servants of the man immediately assembled a modest table for them. For dinner, the elder served the Gel some strange fish, from which it also carried a turf. Not only the guest, but also the owner himself was dissatisfied with such a submission. The chef gave them a salmon, which he took away from cats a year ago. The dissatisfied man took his servant by his head and literally smashed his head. He has long been how vain and stupid was his personal chef. As soon as he does not understand that the basis of proper food is fresh foods. The servants said they could recycle everything, but the elder refused. They were absolutely talentless and could still not prepare anything normal. After all, it was all of the fault of the bloody witch. 10 years ago, during the conquest of Zhonggujuan, her plan was to be crucial. If it didn't end with a senseless betrayal, if everything went as it should, then everything would be controlled by the heavenly demon sect. And the goal they went to and the daily pleasure of real Chinese cuisine, and not by the tasteless garbage that chefs are now served. The gel could not believe that the real purpose of invading the sect into the Middle Earth was some pleasure in cooking. The past day. Ryu, John, and assistants continued their long way to the command, and at that time they had already ended all the food. Chonvan was very dissatisfied with the fact that the assistants were so wasteful in just one day. John constantly tried to reassure the girls so that they behave more calm and not accused of all the troubles of the cook. Mr. Ryu is the hardest, so they have to suffer. However, while the John persuaded the helpers to hold herself in her hands, she had a stomach from hunger. Then Ryu stopped and suggested that you do a halt to find food and have a snack. At first, he thought to prepare one of those ingredients that were still in the cart, but he did not find much food and spices, so he asked the helpers to sow in the district in search of something edible. Quite quickly they found the onion first, and then they found a real chicken. But only when she noticed Raya, she immediately began to hook as not in herself and try to escape from him. But where did the wild chicken come from in this area? Not wanting to miss such a pasty piece, Ryu and helpers immediately rushed into the pursuit of a bird. But she rushed in the bush and they are following her. Ryu confidently rushed into the bush and grabbed something, deciding that he had managed to catch a chicken. But when he looked, he realized that he had grabbed not at her, but for the paw of a real bear. A huge beast cheated fiercely on the guy. But here a helper appeared from behind the bushes. He tried to save Raya, despite the fact that he shouted, asking her not to risk it. However, suddenly she began to talk to him in the right and quickly reassured. But who is it at all? And how many talents still this little girl? As a result, she easily agreed with the bear that he would not attack them, and Ryu treats the bear with her dish. And if suddenly he does not like the food, then Guyan allowed the bear to eat Ryu himself. So it has passed for a while. And then Ryu took the cooking and asked the girls to cut the onions and light a fire. Unfortunately, they have no oil, so I was about to cook chicken on the grill. To begin with the pre-treated chicken, he cut into pieces of appropriate size. He removed the bones and the chicken was soaked in water for a while to remove all the smells. Chicken in their case is almost the perfect option. It is easy to prepare using the minimum amount of ingredients that can be extracted even in the forest. And the dish is guaranteed to taste anyone. He prepared a barbecue from her. Onion meat cooked over an open heat. Chicken sauce is prepared from soy sauce, garlic, meat, and a secret Ryu's secret ingredient. For cooking, he borrowed a small brush from the NEC, and he promised that he would take it for a short time. If you apply the sauce too early, the outside of the chicken will burn. And if you put it too late, its taste will be the taste of the barbecue. It is necessary to achieve a light glazed brown. The balance of taste, smell, and appearance is the key to making the perfect dish. Even 1,000 years later, most cooks honors these foundations. Thus, Ryu finished cooking the barbecue for the company. He spread the meat on a plate and presented chicken skewers with leeks on coal. Everyone immediately pounced on food, trembling before so pleasant and ordinary at first glance taste is inevitable. Sweet meat in a tender, crisp crust impregnated with the smell of coal. It is so juicy that it immediately fills the entire mouth, even pours over the edge. It is strange that it turned out so delicious, although the raya was not even the ingredients. Not only Chonvan's satellites, but even the bear liked his new dish. Dinner went to a hurry, and it's time to rest. Only Ryu sat in front of the cauldron and boiled them with donuts on the road. The flour and oil are almost over. Ryu hoped that they would have a village on the way, and he would be able to buy everything they needed. However, it is better to prepare as many donuts as possible. On the one hand, the culinary talent of Ryu helped him a lot, but on the other, the assistant constantly ate everything as he had time to cook. It would be much more convenient to transport food if they had a refrigerator. Yang heard his reasoning aloud and suddenly became interested. And what meant the word refrigerator? In order to get out of the uncomfortable situation, Chonvan lied that the refrigerator is such a difficult time in cooking. Then John sat down to the campfire and said that when he was so complicated, Ryu may not explain. The guy exhaled with relief, and John asked why she doesn't sleep so late. The girl replied that she probably had insomnia, but at the same time looked somehow embarrassed and intensely. But the insightful Ryu realized that she simply could not sleep on an empty stomach, and he confessed to her that she also had a bit of at night, so there is nothing shameful here. Ryu suggested that Chan try one donut, but did not notice that because of the delicious smell he woke up and Ha was. After that, she quietly woke her sister. John gratefully accepted one donut and tried. They were much tastier if you eat them immediately after cooking. The sisters were quietly looking after the elders, admiring how cute they treated each other. Yang could not but praise his groom and reminded him that he was cooking just wonderful. She and her father traveled all the Middle Lands and tried much. For example, she tried the famous groper fillet. No matter how delicious it is clear that expensive ingredients can be cooked more delicious dishes. But she considered the preparation of Ryu the best in the world. Ryu modestly agreed that the more rare ingredients always come from a more skilled dish. But for Ryu, cooking is another. For him, cooking is not a tool for showing. Over time, even if everything that surrounds it is to remain true to its business. Yang listened carefully to his confession, warmed by the warmth of the campfire. Ryu was sure that taking the kitchen accessories would be able to remember all the precious moments of life. Here's what he meant: cooking, memories, family. After such a passionate speech, the John even seemed to say such stupidity when she spoke of expensive ingredients. After all, cooking is really deeper. Taking up the donuts, Chonvon decided to share something else. As for the cook, his thoughts may seem fun, but it seems that there is something in cooking that is much more important than the dish itself. What is much more important? With whom you split this dish. There is very little dough left in the roux, so he was able to prepare only one piece, an oblong bun in the form of a braid. He divided it in half and suggested that John eat it together. Considering what Chonvon just said, this seemingly simple gesture meant a lot to them. Now John realized that it was for this reason that she liked everything she was preparing for her Chonvon. Next day. The halt is over, and the company was going to continue its journey. Suddenly Ha was insisted that they were obliged to take a bear with them. In addition to the fact that she just liked it, he was also useful. Strong. He could probably help in a difficult situation. Then Ryu stopped arguing and thought that the Ha was right, at least because the bear could pull the cart. Chong was already glad that they will now be able to go together, but it turned out that the cart still continued to carry Ryu, and the bear only sat on him, and he drove the boy to a couple of hectares. At this time, the Gel was in fairly mixed feelings. He himself did not remember, because of which this centuries-old senseless enmity between the mighty clans of Chegel and himself began, and why he is adjusted by these strange reasons, mocked from childhood over John. Probably then he was too small to understand how stupid his behavior was. He had to deal with her badly, although in reality he had never had to deal with these disassembly. Despite the fact that the Gel was the initiator of the abuse, he could not listen to that some other children laughed at Chan. He could even beat because he heard the girl ridiculed by other children for her duck lips. It seemed strange to others because other abusers thought that Gel was with them. But according to Gel, he only had the right to joke and laugh at the John. Because of this, other families often stopped friends with him. And now, a year later, the Gel realized that he really had never hated a little one. So now, realizing his true feelings, he wanted to make anything Chong with his bride. And Gel did not understand why Jong did not pay attention to him. The most beautiful boy of the country, as he thought himself. After all, John now has become such a non-span of beauty. Why she got some annoying, meaningless village, which was considered by Gel Chonvon. Yes, let him be a dragon of cooking, but Gel is the eldest son in the dynasty himself. Although, maybe it was a reason. Maybe precisely because he was the son of an influential family in Murim, John did not pay attention to him. Then the Gel decided to completely change itself, find a new style, stop being so attached to the family. He dropped the traditional outfit, deciding that it was only a mask that hid its true essence. He decided to declare himself a follower of the cult of the heavenly demon, and to refuse the title of the heir of the family himself. It is time to show their parents who were tired of old age to the conservatives who he really is. Therefore he arrived in the elder of the cult of heavenly demon to join them. And the cult, having received news about the son of a bloody witch, decided to get out of their shelter and burned it as they were starting a new stage. Now that the elder knew where to find a bloody witch, they will be able to take revenge on the heavenly demon and end the fact that he started 10 years ago. But to begin with, they need to find Ryu Chonvon, the son of a witch. As the elder seemed, he had to know where his mother was. However, they needed to disguise so that the inhabitants of the Middle Lands did not reveal the cult. You cannot create unnecessary noise until they grab a witch. When the rest of the cult participants were ready to go on the road, the elder asked where the Gel was. The servants only heard that the guy went to dress, but he was gone for a very long time. But immediately after these words, the guy finally appeared and shocked everyone in a new way. The guy believed that his new outfit fully corresponded to the radical observance of the cult, which rejects all frames. That's just the new image that he considered a manifestation of the true himself was too strange and bold. The elder considered it something inappropriate, and his instincts sent anxiety signals. But not to lose his informant, he had to say that Gel was going on his new image. Then, in order to translate the topic, the older reminded that the Gel still did not tell him where to look for Ryu, and Gel replied that he was ready to lead them. and Chonvon, John, assistant and bear continued their journey. It has passed a lot of time until they left Uncle Chan's possession and went to seek the king of medicine. Their new friend, the bear, was much more useful than Ryu assumed. He could carry them and move them over the small river and help the fish catch. Thanks to the rich nature of the Middle Lands, they still continued their journey without worrying about food. Perhaps because they have been traveling for so long, Ryu has become very close to John. And perhaps this was influenced by his mysterious forces of cooking. But the relationship between them became more strong and trusting. But as it happened, the Middle Lands often tossed them with different surprises. For example, once a small gang of robbers attacked them. But thanks to the Nan and their new friend, these surprises no longer made them suddenly. In general, the journey to the weapon was without much problems. And finally, the company got the destination. At least Chonvon made such a conclusion based on the fact that the weather and nature around have changed. It has become hotter and more like a jungle. Compared to the median lands, the temperature in the south was quite high. Especially Nerve was their bear. The bear simply felt the presence of outsiders who were not noticed by travelers. From the bushes they were observed by a young girl who was angry. And next to her was a large manual dog. A moment of their journey, the bear told travelers that they would not go with them. He could have outlined the climate to him. There is a divorce for each meeting, but sometimes separation is not the worst part. Soon friends will have to find out that the instincts of the wild beast provided danger, and partly, the bear left them. A little later, they noticed the first sign that indicates the territory of the territory to the palace. A horned skull hanged on a long pillar, which was unloved to the guests. On the contrary, she believed that it was so greeted by guests according to their traditions, and everything would be fine. But Chonvon felt bad, so he asked Chong to monitor the environment more closely. The girl said with the map that her uncle gave, and said they almost came. As here, from where you do not get, Chonvon notes that they are going to attack. The same girl with her dog tried on the travelers from above, arranging a complete defeat. These were people from the Nanman Beast Palace, Minnie's girl and her Haska, and it was obvious that they were very disliked by the Middle Ages, considering the nasty. For some reason, many attacked them, and immediately began to blame that the Mediterranean was bringing misery on Nanman. Ryu tried to enter her dialogue with her, and explained that they only searched for one person here, and did not come with bad intentions. But the girl did not want to listen, so she pulled a dagger out of the vagina and began to wave them. Fortunately, Ryu managed to protect himself with the first pan. Then a John got out of the fragments of the cart. She wanted to rush to the bridegroom, but she blocked her way at the instruction of her mistress. But the husky did not harm the lady, biting the tail and driving away. He dropped her sideways, and they wisely quarreled at each other. After all, they only searched for the king of medicine. Yang could not allow some crazy to ruin all their plans. Then Meni was distracted by Ryu for a moment, feeling a heavy frost behind her back. Yang was angry. She was ready to destroy everything and everyone in her way. Here, Ryu was squeezed, noticing that the bride is too excited. But Meni did not allow him to do anything by throwing the guy sideways. The girl was even more angry foreigners by the fact that they also hide their true forces. Meni attacked a John, which was already ready to attack her with her magic. However, at the same time, they shouted at the same time, urging the girls not to do it and move away from each other. Then the girls really needed listening to them. Something like this by her master that she stopped attacking them. Mini said that, as she knows, dogs hate in the Middle Lands. But they are probably an exception. As it turned out, Meni was taken by the ha-ha after the dog. Strange, they did not see them before, but the dog. Mini ran up and began to press her. According to the girl, Ha was very sweet. John wanted to admit honestly that it was only a misunderstanding, but Ryu stopped her. All his pot was completely crumpled by Meni. It is better not to pour it again, and admit that it is not really a dog. Now all their safety is kept on the Ha, and how convincingly it will be able to play the dog in the future. Mini picked up Ha-ha in her hands and wary what she liked. Their dog did not mean that they liked it too. Chan carefully tried to ask the girl about the king of medicine they were looking for. But Meni suddenly said that there was no king in the Nanman Palace. However, one charlatan recently started in their settlement. The girl agreed to spend them in the settlement. Chonvon and Zhang still wanted to see the doctor who spoke of Shatenko. She agreed to introduce the foreigners with him, but warned that much was not expected from him. Chonvon managed to find out that Meni was the daughter of Nanman's palace head. It is clear that he did not particularly like such a company, but in order to find the king of medicine, they are forced to follow her. But if what Menchi says is true, that if they do not have a king of medicine, but there is only one talentless doctor, they went such a long way to get here, Yang was very disturbed. But they could not even discuss it with Ryu, because many was constantly alerted if they whispered with each other. Many could not tear the gaze from Ha. She would never think that one of the middle lands would travel with the dog. It softened her attitude, but she still warned John and Ryu. Her eyes will not lower them. And Ryu thought, why did this girl such evil to foreigners? Many ordered them to silently follow her so that there were no unnecessary conflicts. After a while, they finally came. The day was approaching late in the evening when they were at the Nanman Beast Palace. Nanman is a place that once belonged to Manhwa, which is under the control of the Chegal clan. It is said that Chegal Lian himself caught 7 times and released him. Many believe that it was all a strategy to win the authority of the inhabitants of the south. But in reality, Chegal Liang was thus destroyed by the personality of Manhwa. This case has been well demonstrated by the sociopathic and cruelty of Chegal Lan in recent years. Coldness and calculation of every moment of life is one of the charms of this famous commander. Only think, because Chegal Chon was a descendant of such a great man, and what happened to him. When travelers entered the city, Ryu confessed that he never thought that there was such a place in the jungle. There were so many animals in the settlement that one of the helpers of John could not be surprised constantly. She never thought there were so many types of dogs. In this era, the dogs were still more like wild animals. For some reason, Nanmen had a dog, but for some reason everyone looked very depressed here. Something in this city was wrong. It was read on the faces of people and felt in the atmosphere. Many said that it was all because the plague began in the city. Each of the residents lost someone from their family. Chong carefully asked many, and she also lost someone. The girl reacted very sharply and ordered the foreigners to close their mouth again and continue to follow her. Many was annoyingly said that they had all the troubles because of this damned deceiver who called himself the king of medicine. How could he call himself a great doctor if even one person could not save? Ryu asked. Where did this king of medicine? Where did many lead them? The girl replied that before introducing them to the doctor, she is obliged to show guests to the head. So she brought them to her home and called her father. She introduced John and Daddy, saying that she met them in the woods, and they said they wanted to see their charlatan. The man listened carefully to his daughter, but did not answer anything. He was busy having prayed before the altar, and then suddenly spoke with his daughter, but not about travelers. He sadly told her that 3 were killed in the city today. Even Ryu became awkward. Is it all because of the plague? After praying, the head greeted his guests from the center. Since they went such a long way, they deserve hospitality. However, today it was not the best day to talk, so he asked to postpone their meeting to the next. But when he heard this, many became angry. She told her father that she brought these travelers to the city just to cut them off, and this doctor and sort of spirits. The father sadly bowed his head and asked his daughter not to say such stupid, cruel things. He will not allow her daughter to cut off the head of her rescuer. Therefore, Menza, the head of the city, ordered his daughter to take foreigners to the healer. She was dissatisfied with this, but still went to her husband. Ryu and John rushed after her. But Ryu wanted to find out if their king of medicine is not suitable. Many confessed that at first she believed in him, more than anyone else. But then everything changed. Suddenly they heard someone began to swear to the doctor, calling him a deception. So they found it. The townspeople attacked the doctor and even pushed to the ground. They did not understand why he could not save anyone. Now, Ryu had the opportunity to make his own opinion on the doctor, and the townspeople continued to shout at the king of medicine and call him a talentless deceived. They so despair that they had already started chasing him from the village. Anyone who enrolled in an appointment with a doctor soon died. But stop, did the king of medicine be a veterinarian? So in this city not people but dogs suffered. Noticing that people were already overwhelming with aggression, Ryu could not help but interfere with their quarrel. But his attempts to settle everything were not immediately successful, because the city's inhabitants were also wary, because he is a stranger. In the end, Ryu still managed to stop the altercation, and he helped the king of medicine finally rise. He said very politely with the doctor, and asked him not to go, because they also needed help. But suddenly the doctor asked Raya why he was so respectful. As it turned out, the surprises did not end. The doctor turned out to be quite young, so not a man but a woman. Ryu seemed the opportunity to talk to the king of medicine. He gave her a letter from her uncle, and they went to the girl in silence while she read it. However, on the road, Chongvon could not stop thinking that the doctor's appearance was no more than 20 years. She is also a medical girl in medieval China. How did it work out? The doctor looked carefully in the scroll and went somewhere. The king of medicine, which was represented by Raya, looked completely different. He thought they would meet some wise old man, but no. So this strange attire looked too modern for this era. While Ryu was thinking about it, John noticed that the guy began to somehow carefully consider the doctor. At that time, John remembered that she was told that many men were quite wrong. Did this girl like Ryu? Inside John's jealousy? At that time, even John began to speak Ryu, suspecting this girl in fraud to take her attention from her. Chunvan's misunderstanding asked why John came to this conclusion. The guy could agree with the fact that the girl looked a little suspicious, but why the fraudster immediately? Then John told both Chunvona and a doctor who heard that the king of medicine was familiar with the king of poisons from the Tyan clan. And the girl was not like him. Then the doctor confessed that she did not like all these gossip around her. She read the letter and can say that the person to whom she was dedicated was most likely her teacher. She also said that if they do not believe her, they can ask themselves in the elder. Previously, she often came to him. Then Chunvon and Chong had no reason not to trust the girl. But John and Ryu were not the first to confuse the girl with her teacher. Some time ago, the master departed from business, and now it turns out, to help Ryu with the problem of a new queen of medicine. With every minute, it was increasingly difficult to continue the conversation for Ryu, as the cable car over which they walked through the gorge was very nervous. But the doctor reassured him that they almost came. And she continued to tell. People believed that if she lives near the village, it would only bring them new troubles. So she had to settle in the depths of the jungle. It is strange that the Queen of Medicine, one of the 8 kings of Marima, lived in a god of forgetful shack. They climbed inside the smoking, which was a girl's house, and she brewed for all tea. She apologized to the guests for most likely not able to help them. This sudden epidemic of plague has changed a lot. She was now engaged in exploring this virus and trying to find treatment. Her skills were enough to treat people, but about dogs, how much you do not try, she cannot find a solution. If only her teacher was here, then everything would be much easier. Suddenly, the John spoke. She reassured the girl and acknowledged that the doctor was doing a lot for the city. She has a right face that she works in the sweat of his forehead to help these cute beasts. And John believed that it is very wrong to hate her from the citizens because she could not cure their pets. Ryu was sad because even 1,000 years ago, doctors were so underestimated. Suddenly, the doctor said that the cases were not quite the way they thought. If people spare her, then everything she did was not much important. And so they hoped that she would be able to help them, and she had a motivation to work harder. But nothing wrong with the fact that the John did not immediately understand the essence of the attitude of the citizens to the doctor. The residents did not hate it from the beginning. A few years ago, the land was literally sprinkled with medicinal plants, so the doctor decided to go here and study them. However, she came across the residents of this village and they asked her for help. Many, the daughter of an elder village, suffered from fever, and the doctor gave her a tincture on a verbal bark that saved her life. Then Ryu noticed another strange detail. The wedding bark contains salicylate and azurin, but these medicines have been ahead of their time for 1,000 years. Where did she find out about him? And the doctor, meanwhile, continued the story. What she learned from the king worked, and she was accepted with revealed arms. The elder even allowed her to live in the countryside to continue to study medicinal plants. However, the diet, which was eaten by the locals, drove it crazy. She taught them to cook some dishes popular in the Middle Lands. Fortunately, they liked, and the nutrition culture began to change gradually. And Many was so inspired that she promised her father to marry a man from the Middle Lands. But one day, when they dinner, Many's dog, Chang, became infected with a plague. On that day, the doctor made a huge mistake that changed her life in the village. During this conversation, another misery happened. The next inhabitant of the village passed away from his pet. The poor puppy was mourned throughout the village. It was their common grief. Ryu and John could only be surprised to howl that dogs were pointing, that people. The doctor shared with them her fear that she would not survive this night. Ryu and John realized that it was killed by the same puppy who was brought to a doctor today. In fact, residents can be understood. They are sorry for a dog. But why is it so grief for the whole village? Then the doctor announced to them that a puppy, who was born at about the same time, was selected here in the Palace of Beasts of a newborn baby. From now on, they do everything together. They live, eat, learn something and grow. But it's no secret that the life of a dog is several times shorter than human. And when the dog dies, it is believed that along with her dies the baby eye of her master. Then the owner starts another dog and is already considered an adult. He, together with his pet, begin to help the community and confess part of the palace. After the death of the second dog, the owner is recognized as old, and he starts the last dog from which he lives for the rest of his life. So, 3 lives, 3 deaths. Every day a person divides life with his pet. Now John understood their loss. This epidemic began with the first dog of Many, who was called Chang. Initially, the doctor did not attach much importance to Many's words that her pet was bad, because there was no reason. The symptoms of Changa were the same as in Many: heat, nausea, shortness of breath. So the doctor decided to treat him as well as his little hostess. Suddenly, in the middle of the history, Ryu exclaimed, but immediately apologized for it. He just knew that salicylate was poisonous to dogs, but it was too late. The doctor continued her story and said that Changa did not improve after taking medication. The symptoms only deteriorated, and the frightened Many did not understand what was the matter. The doctor tried to do everything to save the unhappy puppy, but the catastrophe was irreversible. The doctor tried to read this puppy, but if you do no difficulty with a person, then these dogs are not at all. He looked so bad as if puppies were given poison. And of course, Many immediately accused the doctor of stupid and did not understand anything in treatment. After all, her medicine was to help, and as a result, Chang died, and the doctor could not help him. She turned out to be powerless that day. Chang lay half, lived for a few more minutes until he stopped breathing. Thus, Many became an adult at such a young age. Now it was clear why Many was so rude with them. After that loss, other dogs gradually began to ache. The process was not so fast, but everyone had the same symptoms. Whatever the herb she gave or the procedure did not do, she failed to save any of them. Of course, the residents began to blame the whole doctor. She allegedly brought this plague with her. But now she began to think seriously whether they were right. But as far as Ryu was known, there are no viral diseases that are transmitted from dogs to dogs. Therefore, Ryu asked to review the study of the Queen of Medicine in this field. So she allowed him to explore everything she wanted. The girl had something else she would like to show Ryu. The doctor asked if Chonvan had not accidentally studied medicine. He replied that no, he was just interested in. And John whispered quietly to the girl, which is really a very modest. He recently healed a John, thus saving her life. He also promised to take her as his wife. Yang said it specifically so that the doctor did not dare to look at her fiancé. Meanwhile, Ryu considered the materials studied by the herbs. Everything he knew is that Marima's world is not subject to common sense. But medicine should be like his world. If only Ryu could find out the name of the disease, he would be able to find a solution. Although, if you think, he is not a veterinarian. But it seems that at first he will have to help the doctor and then to deal with his problems. However, on a scroll girl he found something interesting. Just did not have time to study them as suddenly the earth shuddered. It began as a real earthquake, and at the same moment a puppy ran into the house. It was a small, for some reason evil, chihuahua. The doctor suddenly said that it seemed to have passed her time, because immediately afterwards Menze broke into the house. This strong man lifted the improvised girl's hut with only one hand, just because he could not climb inside through his complete set. In order not to worry about it, the man just took and rejected the canopy sideways, leaving the doctor literally without the roof over his head. The girl sadly bowed her head. She finally thanked her head for hospitality and for giving them the opportunity to study many plants. She was sorry that she could not meet their expectations, so she kneeled and last thanked Menzi for everything. But instead of the answer, the man suddenly took her by the collar. Ryu was about to intercede for the girl. If she does not help him, he will not be able to marry the John. But the head was going not to scold or fight the doctor. On the contrary, he reminded her that it is not time to let the snot on. The pupil of Many seems to be ill. Therefore, he needed the immediate help of the King of Medicine. Many was worn around her friend and persuaded to eat at least a little, and when someone tried to talk to her, she immediately threatened a brave dagger. Do not even think about what can be the next victim of a terrible illness. The frightened servant immediately pulled out and apologized. It is strange that from a cute, shining girl, Many turned into such a harsh girl. This plague has taken the lives not only of their pets. Suddenly, a doctor, John and Ryu, as well as the head of the village, ran into the house. Mini was very dissatisfied with the fact that the King of Medicine appeared in her home. She said she was not happy here for some free charlatans. She tried to convince everyone, and herself too, that she was just tired. Now she will feed him and will get better. The doctor did not retreat and asked the girl permission for examination, but the girl refused again. Why only no one listens to her? Now her beloved dog has become infected. Many said she could not trust his friend's life again. She believed that from this King of Medicine it was of no use. But Ryu had one idea about this situation. Quite unexpectedly, he returned her notes to the doctor and said he had to check something. He was not sure what was going to do, but it was worth trying. The doctor thoughtfully considered the list that held Ryu, and could not understand that it was the opinion that she visited his head. Suddenly, the guy said he seems to be a plague. Ryu understood something when he looked at the diet. Although he is not a King of Medicine, he is a dragon of cooking. Quite unexpectedly, Ryu selected the dumplings who were appointed and began to eagerly eat them one by one. The angry Many was ready to attach to a stranger behind such actions, but Ryu finally identified the cause of all dog diseases. As he thought, the matter was not in the plague, but in the onion, which was added to dogs. For them, it is like poison for people. Then Ryu went out to the main square and told the whole village about it. After all, the dogs began to get sick just when they began to add onions to their diet. The inhabitants doubted in his words, because if they were onion and everything was fine with them, but for some reason, then he affected the dogs so negatively. They did not want to listen to the explanation of Ryu, and thought that he was just another stranger who was trying to deceive them. However, one old man appeared, who told that this stranger was called the Dragon of Cooking at Home, and the most important and incredible rumors that you can imagine. Therefore, having learned what a person is important, the residents decided that they no longer have a reason to believe him. People triumphed. The Dragon of the Cooking finally saved the nomination. Now none of their friends will die. Finally, the doctor could exhale quietly. Everything ended. Now many will be satisfied, and it will be fine. But at the moment when all people honored Raya, he told them that the only one whom they should thank was the King of Medicine. However, they did not understand why and still considered the girl a deception, who so did not help anyone. Ryu insisted that it was a continuous misunderstanding, and it was not a plague at all. He asked the townspeople, does he know at least any of them ate their dog this morning? Yesterday? Maybe a year ago? None of them knew. But the doctor, the one whom they call charlatan, recorded it all. Day by day, diet of every dog in the countryside, and how their pet felt. She wrote down everything, even how sharp and healthy their teeth are. And then the townspeople acknowledged that Ryu was right. Chonvon could not honestly say that he understood the pain of this village. But if someone understood, he was the King of Medicine they hated so much. Suddenly, Many appeared in the crowd and ordered everyone to stand out. She ran to the doctor and hugged her firmly. The girl acknowledged that she had no right all this time. Several days have passed since that day, and the palace has been designed completely differently. From the moment they changed their diet, there were no new diseases. The inhabitants resigned and began to realize that some food was not created for pets. And Ryu managed to teach them some dishes. Residents and their pets have found an understanding that turned the page in the textbook of their gastroculture. Somehow Ryu turned to Ha and told her that she could stop pretending and not acting like a dog. But it turned out that she did not even do, but simply behaved strange. In the evening, Chonvon rested sitting on a porch when the Queen of Medicine was rushed to him and offered to dine together. She was very grateful to Ryu for help and noted that he probably knew a lot about dogs. He told her that he had a little dog nicknamed Bin, even wondering how he coped there in another world without his master. The doctor was interested in why Ryu said that he had a dog, had been. She asked if he was in his past life, not in that. The guy first answered the confident yes, and then suddenly shy. He grabbed the girl by her shoulders and immediately pulled her into some quiet place to discuss everything there. This was noticed by a John that could not but be excited. Where did they go? Only two. When Ryu and the doctor were alone, he asked where she knew about his past life. The girl said that the boy had literally written on her face. After all, he knew so much about dogs, and also about the effect of her tincture. She said that her teacher, the King of Medicine, was the same as Ryu. He also had memories of other lives, and not just in him. In the field of martial arts, science, painting, and even in business, there are people with abilities that go beyond common sense. Therefore, there are quite a few. Even the other kings of Marima, their abilities are caused by a pious trembling and fear. And now this list will also be added to the culinary dragon. Now Ryu realized that he was not one of the future. This strange wording was interested in the doctor. She realized that Chonvon did not know the truth at all. Then she asked him if his true life was the same as Ryu sees him now. After all, Ryu did not even think about it. In fact, the martial arts, and these were such strange factors. This was definitely not in his real world. The doctor said that she was just trying to understand what her teacher meant. When he told her it, she has not yet had the knowledge, as it was now. But he said that the time that flows around us is not always in one direction, and it is not always seen to each of us in the same form. If Ryu can understand this, he will have the opportunity to meet face to face with countless versions of himself. The King of Medicine called it transmission or spread. The head in Ryu was walking around. He did not understand what the girl was telling him. And here it turned out that the theory of multi-seats was true. It turns out that Ryu was right in his assumptions. Ryu Chonvon is he, not some other person. It's just that he is from another universe. The doctor confirmed. After all, if it were the body of someone else, it would be called obsession. But Ryu did not believe in either spirits or ghosts. The doctor suddenly remembered that she once read one of the teacher's work about spreading. As far as she remembers, this spread had to cause any memory problems. So it is strange that Ryu does not remember his past. These gaps may have been associated with something else. She remembered that in a letter, Hokchigal wrote that perhaps Ryu was somehow associated with a demonic cult. So she decided to check it. At first, Raya rejoiced that the girl would not use the same technique as Mr. Chigal, but then thought that she, like a king of medicine, could come up with something more scary. The girl took 2 long, thick needles and said that she would do the technique of acupuncture. To do this, she inserted needles into the top of the Ryu, symmetrically, relative to the cut. She inserted them into the tone of Zhang and Beck He, which were responsible for memory. But at first she inserted them too much, so she hurried to fix them. And even then the guy fell into the depths of consciousness. And from the house of the doctor seemed such a strange, multicolored light that even the townspeople paid attention to him. Memories immediately began to sound in the RHU before their eyes. Again, he found himself in that ill-fated fire. The head of the cult glanced at the witch. She had the same sharp sword even after she left the heavenly demon. However, the naked eye shows that it is no longer so skillful in battle. The bloody witch, Other Salt, was the former elderly of the cult of the heavenly demon. After the new elder made with her native village, in the sake of the salt, could not leave him alive. She wanted to mock the body of a man, and not spare the enemy at all, until he feels the same as she feels after the loss of a loved one. The head of the cult laughed. He noticed that, no matter how cool, and her family did not change it, he still believed that it was the woman who was to blame for everything, because she made the choice herself, and surrendered her clan. The witch denied everything. She did not want to admit that it was the cause of this nightmare. This time, he stopped that he had arranged this fire and got rid of the opponent's husband, and went back to restore strength. But he promised that he would soon return and advise the woman to prepare for it, because she would have to pay for her betrayal. When the man left, the first thing that the witch made, she ran to her son Chonvon. He was whole and unharmed physically, but his psyche was covered with cracks. Chonvon and the doctor, as if in a cinema, were watching his memories together through acupuncture technique. Ryu confessed that he did not remember all these memories, that he was not him, but someone else. It was a feeling that he was looking not at the event of his life, but like a dramatic movie. The doctor noticed that the breath and pulse of the RHU were okay, and he was calm. Surprisingly, he didn't lie. But the woman who was an elderly cult had a more important role. The doctor set up the next film of memories. Then they started watching the next movie from Chonvon's memoirs. It was a time after a fire when Ryu and his mother began to live together. Ryu dreamed of becoming a master of martial arts, so he trained carefully at the stuffed. However, he was still not enough, so he accidentally released the sword from his hands and cut. Mom immediately dumped and broke her hand to her son. She was very glad that Chonvon was engaged in martial arts, but she very much wanted him to realize that even his sword could be the most important opponent for him. The guy noticed that his mother spoke about it as if she did not know from rumors. He said he heard that man called her a bloody witch. The woman tried to explain to her son that she has given up on this name for a very long time, but Chonvon was indifferent. He believed that if it weren't for his mother, his father would not have died, that they had all the problems because she was a witch. The doctor, watching it, noticed that the tongue behind the teeth of Chonvon at that time, of course, could not keep. Ryu considered strange that with such a weak body he tried to engage in martial arts. And then they turned on the next memory. One day he offered one warrior a duel on his sword, but he disgraced, unable to repel even one of his attack. And the warrior thought that they would have a good battle on the sword. And Ryu was so weak that even a normal sword in his hands could not hold. But suddenly when the warrior and his friends were already going to go, Ryu suddenly said that he would not be fighting with the warrior if he knew he was such a slight. He would not have got involved in a fight if he knew that he would have to deal with such insignificant people as they were. Then the warrior could not stand. This stupid guy decided to suffer his patience. To teach the boy, the man swung his hand with his sword. The soldiers of the warrior laughed and supported him, but here they appeared the bloody witch. She could not allow her son to be hurt. Due to her magic suggestion, the witch deprived the life of her son's abuser. Chonvon asked her to stop, but the process was irreversible. She finally ended her attack with the technique of admiration of the soul, a bloody flower. The traumatic memory was greatly published in the mind of a young boy. He will never be able to look at his mother calmly after such cruelty. And the woman, in the meantime, quietly reminded her son that he would never achieve revenge. This time, Ryu was lucky, and she had time to come. But suddenly she will not be nearby next time, and the guy will have a problem. It seems that Raya was almost not injured. Therefore, the salt came closer to her son and suggested that he go home. But the guy pulled away from her and ordered his mother not to touch him. He shouted in a panic to the whole county, which was a bloody witch in front of him, and scared it from her further and further. Then the other salt realized that it was time. One day she dreamed of a dream. Warm, sweet. The dream was not contaminated with the blood of people close to her. It is a pity that he was not destined to become reality to this day. She realized that if everything continues, the pursuers of the bloody witch sooner or later will get Chanvona again. All that she had left was to erase all the pain he experienced from the memory of Chanvon, along with his memories. She pressed her son to herself and deprived him of all the negative memories of her witchcraft. It was a technique of capturing souls, oblivion. Unfortunately, the memories erased by its equipment are later returned. But it will no longer make the same mistake. She will not look for her son's heart, neither forgiveness nor understanding. It does not matter that Chanvon will think about her. Now she had no other way out. She decided to give her son the teaching for the last time. She said that the knife was needed not only to injure people, but not only to grasp the martial arts like a mom. If he finds a way to convey these feelings, he will be able to win the heart of any person. She didn't matter. She would forget her son or not, but she would very much like him to forget her last words. Then she lowered the young man into the water and made the transfer technique. Now, both the doctor and Chanvon became known why his memories were so vague and why he knew nothing about the transfer. Then the doctor decided that it was time to finish the viewing, and Chanvona had a rest, but he was not released by another question. Suddenly Raya began to rush in a movie box. The doctor asked him again. They still had time. They could continue the revision and later. But Ryu has already found the film he sought so desperate. He immediately inserted it into the camera because he wanted to check something very much. But the longer the session went, the worse the doctor felt. Her forces ended. Suddenly, a monitor appeared on the screen, on which a thin line of the patient's pulse. These were memories from another Chanvon life. Doctors tried to do whatever could be for the patient, but unfortunately, she was not survived. Looking at the boy who was sad at the bed of his mother, his father decided that it was time to prepare his son for this loss. The mother took her son by her hand and apologized for her to failed him again. It was a little Chanvon. He also experienced a difficult loss in his true life. Then his mother told him the same thing as a witch in his memory, so he never seemed strange. Ryu asked if this same phrase could just be a coincidence. The doctor said that her teacher told her that when the life of a person was transferred and everything was changing around, he forgets everything. But the most important connections do not disappear. Suddenly, the viewing room finally dispelled. They returned into their world. The girl was fine, but very exhausted with the session. She had to rest. However, at this point, Ryu suddenly felt the heavy cold air behind himself. It was a Chan. She drilled the bridegroom with an icy look. John asked that they were happening here, that these began to break out of Ryu, and he began to shout so much. The guy hurried to assure the girl that it was just a misunderstanding. But at that moment, the king of medicine fell on him from fatigue. The jealousy was circulating the head, but she could not assume that his first kiss did not occur from John. The anger of the Chan for the village could turn into a real disaster. The weather has changed sharply and cold. The townspeople quickly realized that the cause of this phenomenon was in their guests. A heavy snowfall began. It was so unusual for the townspeople that they did not even know what it was called, and only the head told them that it was called snow. Meanwhile, the John was getting more and more. Its strength was growing relentlessly. So much so that Chong has already begun to speak in some incomprehensible Ryu. Even the color of the girl's hair has changed. And Ryu tried to explain to the bride that there was a misunderstanding. Suddenly, huge icy crystals grew out of the earth, which almost pierced both the Raya and the doctor. They tried to escape from the malicious owner of the cold, where they only came out. Only now did Ryu realize that it was not necessary to start with his inspection, but it is better to first bring to the survey of the Chon. He crawled to the doctor and said that they had to get out. But before they managed to do it, Ryu and the doctor noticed that John even calmed down a little. But they were happy early. Yong did not calm down, but on the contrary, collecting energy for a fatal blow. And in a foreign language she said that if she did not reach her, he would not reach anyone. The girl was going to use Tangong as then with pirates. And it was definitely not to escape from such a thing. But here the doctor had a plan. At first, she pulled the needle from the head of Ryu. If only her master saw it, she would immediately begin to paint hygiene and possible infections. But now there was no time to think about such little things. The doctor got out of her shelter and sprung the needle directly into the pole. Thanks to this, the girl blocked the opponents of these paths, because the needles were stuck in the shoulders of John, in the dots of Juigu and Jantai. But it could not stop it for a long time. Then the doctor gave Chonvon a strange bag. They had very little time, as Chon was almost coped with this delay in chi. Then the doctor sent Raya to feed the bride with one of the balls that lay in the same bag. At that time, John had already completely got rid of spokes. Then Ryu confidently began to work closer to his beloved. Chonvon suddenly shouted Chong that, unfortunately, he did not understand that she was trying to tell him because she still spoke in an incomprehensible language. But he is convinced that in their joint life there will be another 1,000 reasons for quarrels. And whatever the quarrel is, cannot be brought to such. He finally came close enough and threw one of the balls into the girl's mouth. But not only the ball worked positively on her, but also that Ryu suddenly remembered their life together. And then all the icy walls around them suddenly began to melt and fall. It has passed for a while and the situation was almost working. At least John calmed down. But now she was in a serious condition after using the forces, and had to care for her carefully. The King of Medicine conducted an examination and concluded that they would not be able to cure the John from these forces. You just need to put up with this. It's part of it. It was a rarity when two energies were combined in one body, yin and yang. Subsequently, the state of the NNO can stabilize. However, the doctor could not say Ryu, or this would happen. Maybe she will be able to find a balance and she can just choose one side. They just have to wait. At the time, Ryu told that these symptoms in the John began after he cured it. But here she suddenly came to the senses of the John and said that it was not true. As a child, long before the meeting with Ryu, the girl began to guess that she had strength. But because she looked, the presence of power did not change anything. Everyone continued to laugh at her. If she was sure that she was endowed with such force, it would be frightened and made it even more. Because of this, John has inadvertently depressed its strength. So Ryu is not guilty of anything. Just Chong thought that nothing would change. She thought she would just have to put up and live all her life. But since the Jaein met, Ryu has changed much. She never thought she could live like everyone else. With such a terrible face and cold in her chest, she only dreamed that it would change. Suddenly, Chonvon interrupted her speech, tied a bandage on his head, and asked if he was hungry. He thought that he had not been preparing for a long time, and remembered that there was something that Ryu wanted to cook specifically for John. He was already going to get out of the house and leave cooking, but suddenly Chan stopped him. She asked if she was not against the cook if she was in this guest house. The guy said he did not mind, but he was interested in learning about the reason. John said that she seems to her hair, as she became ugly, as in the old one, and she is now ashamed to appear in this form on people. But then Chonvon decided to bring Chong outside, and even the doctor, looking outside the window, thought that she never expected to see this in the desk. The whole city was covered with a thick layer of snow, and all this came from Magic Jong. Chonvon said that in an extremely snow, the village looked very beautiful, just like a John itself. This sudden compliment was embarrassed not only by the girl but also by the cook himself. Then John was able to throw away the blanket that covered her hair and rushed into the arms of her lover. After a while, the head, many John and doctor gathered in the guest house of the RU for the digestion of his new dish in honor of the John. He proudly introduced them to the milgsabine, or the plastered ice. The name of the dish is, of course, complicated, but in fact it is just ice chips with red beans. It is clear that in China, the Song dynasty is unlikely to be familiar with such a dish, though it has a rich history, and in the southern part of China, it may be the only chance to try such a dessert. In order to prepare the basis of this dish, a paste of beans, they are soaked and then boiled for a long time. Then you need to prepare the thickening milk. For this milk will boil for a long time, while adding sugar to it. The favorite berry of Ryu is strawberries, unfortunately, not finding it. But the stuffing can be made of any berries and fruits that are available. Unfortunately, fresh snow is not suitable for cooking, so Ryu took a piece of ice from one of the keys in this village. Then the knife crushed it to the chips. And then you just have to add all the ingredients in the correct order. Menzi looked carefully at the dish and noticed that it was not like the main dish, rather simply as a snack. In fact, he was waiting for the culinary dragon something more serious. Ryu said he understood what the head is saying. Ordinary food is capable of quenching hunger, but a simple dessert, such as the preparation of Ryu, can warm an exhausted heart. Chan tried his first. Who would have thought that ordinary ice could be so sweet? The doctor suddenly asked if this ice was safe. Ryu said that, the idea, there should be no problems. The main thing is not to give them, because sugar is not very useful for them. The King of Medicine also liked this taste that cools not only the mouth, but also the mind. The head of the village looked closely at the dish, and confessed that it had passed for a long time since he ate something exclusively for pleasure. The pain from the loss of close friends was as hard that they had completely forgotten about such a simple thing as sweets. The meaning of sweets is to comfort people's hearts, and this day in Ryu was great. In the first life of Chanvon, this phenomenon was called sugar honey, a kind of jump in dopamine. For a very long time in China, they avoided cold food, reading that all the troubles came from it. It is even known that one of the ministers of the Ming dynasty drank cold water every morning to die as soon as possible. However, according to the available documents, the song fit was already widespread in the Songflower dynasty. Different types of ice cream are known. Among them is a dish of patbins, which is very similar to what has been prepared by Ryu. Over the long history of China, only the Sun dynasty actively used stewed ice. However, why this is not clear. One way or another, everything ended well, and their problems have now been solved, so they can return home and prepare for the wedding. Suddenly, Zhang disappeared with this statement of Chanvon. Zhang confessed to Ryu that he learned about his mother from King of Medicine. Chanvon was very frightened that they will now have problems, because how could the son of an elder of a demonic cult marry the daughter of the most famous family? Yang told him that they could not just hold a ceremony, but not because problems may disappear. Just John would like to meet his mother first. She thought that it would be wrong to get married without getting acquainted with her mother-in-law. Chanvon immediately agreed to her proposal, having rejoiced that their wedding would not be cancelled. Meanwhile, one of the dogs of the village was carefully sniffing in the surrounding area. But she did it only to empty the white snow. And there, as it turned out, the gel itself hid under Kuchigura. He was finally able to find Chan and Chanvon after long wandering. The next day, John and Chanvon have already been gathered on the road. Ryu thanked the elders and the townspeople for their hospitality, and promised that as soon as they returned home, they would send the elder and the wedding invitations. And the head thanked them for the invaluable assistance of their village. Before leaving, Ryu asked the King of Medicine to leave a few words. John, meanwhile, asked the helpers to return home and pass the letter from the girl Mr. Cheagle while they were traveling. She promised not to stay and asked her father to get a ceremony as soon as she received the letter. The assistants were a little worried about John. Will she be on the road safe? After all, Ryu is not capable of anything but cooking. Zhang promised that everything would be fine. She just gets acquainted with Mom Chanvon, and they will immediately return home. When Ryu called the doctor to go away, she worried that Chong could understand something again. But Chanvon convinced her that everything was fine. Ryu said he would like to talk to a girl about her teacher. Ryu would very much like the doctor to organize a meeting with this man, and he had a lot of questions for him. But the girl honestly confessed that she did not know where the master is now. He went one day, leaving only a letter. And in this letter there was nothing that could be interested in Raya. Only one hieroglyph was left in the letter, which meant a return. However, the doctor turned out to be wrong. It was interested in RJ. Did the master return to his past life? But how could it be possible? The conversation of Ryu and the doctor was interrupted by the Job. She asked how long they are going to talk. The doctor roared the dialogue and apologized to the fact that Ryu could not help in this matter. Then Ryu thanked the girl for everything and said goodbye to her. The village was grateful and joy to the foreigners who had become desirable guests during their stay. Meanwhile, the gel has already returned to the Heavenly Demon sect to inform the location of the John and its groom. And he did not understand why they could not attack them now when the couple just left Nanmen and was defenseless. But the elder was not going to explain his decisions, but ordered to sit down and remain silent. They cannot spoil the moment they have been waiting for decades. At first, they needed to wait until we find their mother, and the elder wanted to clarify whether the truth of Ryu's companion was from the Chegal clan. The gel confirmed. It surprised the head a little. Even in the icy palace, such strong users could not often be found. This girl may be a problem for them. Ryu and Chan started their way. This is the last place that has come in the memory of the RJ after the session. However, he is not sure that his mom is still there. Even after that horrible case with the new elder cult, the bloody witch moved almost every month. But there were problems, and more important, it was much longer than Ryu thought. They have been on the road for 2 weeks. Only think, in the future, this path would take no more than 2 hours on the plain. Now Hainan is a hinterland where the poor and convicted go. Not surprisingly, there were no normal paths here. There were also no pointers, even villages where you can stop. They didn't even know how much they had to go. It seems that Ryu's body is created for life. And Chanvon was very worried about John. He constantly asked her whether she was tired and whether she needed a stop. But the girl replied that all was well, even when she was crazy about fatigue. But suddenly she remembered that she wanted to ask something in Ryu. She would like Raya to tell her about her mother what she was. But the guy did not even know where to start, given that his mother was a terrible, bloody witch. And John just thought that the culinary skills of Ryu, apparently, a legacy from his mother. But Ryu remembered that his mother's preparation was incredibly bad. Worse is not found. Ryu was sick of one memory of it. But it is strange that, although she was cooking disgusting, but from her dishes in Ryu had some kind of warm feeling. It was much warmer than from a high-quality kitchen. Although it may not be so important, and it is only an old memory. Soon they got that house from the memories of Ryu. But in front of him they saw his mother's tombstone. They didn't have time. His mother was no longer. Bitter tears rolled across the cheeks. At this point, he realized that he would change anything for the opportunity to say goodbye to his mom. Kent is the southernmost province of the Middle Lands. It was here that the famous writer Su Dunpo was sent. He later told about this exile in one of his works. According to the legend of Su Dunpo, he wrote on one of the stones during the exile to the Kandej end of the world, an expression that became an idiom. The idiom describes the sadness that two people are far away and cannot meet, while Ryu stood in front of his mother's tombstone, from which the elder himself did not appear. He would never think that a bloody woman who once was so powerful, so sorry, ended her life. Ruijan immediately realized that it was the same man from his memories. It was the person who attacked the family of Raya in the past. The elder was pleased that the witch ended her life in such a distant, God-forgotten island. Suddenly he approached the tombstone and apologized for everything he did. He apologized as a former friend who once served with her. Ryu was slowly boiling. He asked the man why he came here. From the corner, he will look after all this gel, which was glad because he will finally have a chance to take revenge. He immediately jumped out of the corner and stood before John and Ryu. But not only they did not recognize him in such an outfit, they also said that he was disgusting. Then the gel was introduced to them, very confused because they did not recognize him. The appearance of the gel shocked both of them. Gel suddenly told them that he had long given up his old name. He dropped the shackles who imposed a clan on him and reborn to take revenge. Ryu could not believe that the Gel went to this only because he had lost a dispute. But Gel believed that the fact that the family of Cheagle offended him was a sufficient reason for his actions. Then the Gel asked for a bloody devil, an elder, to crack his strength on a rue so that he could feel pleasure from what revenge. Chan immediately closed the boy with himself, ready to protect him at all costs. But the elder was not going to shed blood for no reason. The Gel reminded him that they were about to kill the son of a witch and make the Chegal clan lean in front of Heavenly Demon. But the elder did not see any sense in this when the bloody witch died. He spent a lot of time chasing after her, and now it's time to rest. The elder decided to return home. Ryu could not believe that his enemy would really go. But everything is really over. Suddenly, the elder said that he heard that Ryu was called a dragon of cooking. However, he believed that it was all the rumors. It was ridiculous to think that a boy who, at their last meeting, was tears over the body of his dead father, now became a dragon. The bloody demon realized that they would not meet them more. Therefore, I would like to give him a small service. He would very much like Raya to prepare him something. Surprisingly, Ryu agreed to dine with the elder. Gel and servants were left to sit on the porch. The servants talked about their own, and the Gel was increasingly immersed in their thoughts about their failure. Revenge for the family, a beloved woman. He did nothing of what he wanted, and Ryu, meanwhile, worked in the kitchen. How did he have prepared his father's killer? But if this dish puts an end to the hostility with the Sky Demon, then the Ryu is ready to stand on all 100, and then all the bad will remain behind. And a wedding will be ahead of the wedding. He will also expect a happy life with John. Soon, Raya stopped cooking and bringing an elder. The guy prepared his new dish for him called Sichuan Jiaozhangmen. Sichuan Jiaozhangmen is a kind of jiaozhangmen, designed and localized in China. This version is very different from Korean, because it uses not jiaozhan, but dubachan or lajhozhan. But before you start eating, the man remembered something. He got his tincture and said that when Ryu treats today, they would drink a drink from the elder. This drink is called Haum, and it is incredibly expensive. Therefore, the bloody demon would love the newlyweds to try it. The drink in the RHU did not cause a special desire, as the smell of the tincture was quite sharp. The elder himself said that the drink is strong, so it may seem too strong. No matter how polite the head of the cult seemed, John felt every part of his body that something was wrong here.